is we can't hear him. Mike, we can't hear you. Sorry. No. We're not getting sound on this end.
Does that mean we're not getting
There-
sound out to the public?
Okay, now we can hear you, Mike. Sorry, can you start again?
Okay, let me start again.
Okay.
Good evening, everybody. Pursuant to Minnesota statutes, section 13D.021, in the current state of emergency due to COVID-19 pandemic, this regular meeting of the Independent School District 279 School Board will be conducted via electronic means. Consistent with the current state and federal pandemic guidance, Superintendent Corey McIntyre and myself, Board Chair Mike Ostafi, have determined that due to the health pandemic and emergency declaration, a meeting format allowing for open in-person attendance is not practical or prudent. As a result, it is unfeasible for at least one board member, the superintendent or general counsel, to be physically present at the regular meeting location. It is also not feasible for members of the public to attend at the regular meeting location. Members of the public may monitor the meeting electronically by streaming online from the district website. An archive recording of this meeting will also be available on the district website. The regular meeting of the Independent School District 279 School Board is called to order at 6:05 p.m. on Tuesday, July 21st, 2020. Board members joining us by video conference, please respond when I call your name. Director Kelsey Dawson-Walton.
Here.
Director Heather Douglas.
Here.
Director Jackie Mosqueda Jones.
I'm here.
Director Tanya Simons.
Here.
Superintendent Corey McIntyre.
Here.
And I, Mike Ostafi, am present. All members of the superintendent's cabinet, several district administrators, and other individuals who are presenting on various agenda items this evening are also logged into this video conference. Please join me as we all recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Board members, do you have any additions to the agenda this evening? Is there a motion to accept the agenda as presented?
This Director Simon, so moved.
Is there a second?
Second. Director
Motion has-
Dawson-Walton.
Thank you. Any discussion? Sherry, can you please take a roll call vote?
Director Douglas?
Aye.
Director Mosqueda Jones?
Aye.
Director Ostafi?
Aye.
Director Dawson-Walton?
Aye.
Director Simons?
Aye.
And that is 5 ayes, no nays, motion passes.
All right, the agenda is accepted. Item number 4, audience opportunity to address the board. When regular board meetings are conducted virtually, 2 options are available for individuals to address the board. With certain parameters, individuals may submit comments online to be read aloud by a staff member or leave a voicemail message to be played at the meeting. Comments submitted to be shared in the public forum must comply with the guidelines for addressing the board published on the district website. 27 online forms and 3 voicemails were submitted for this evening's meeting. Only those forms complying with the guidelines will be read or played. I also like to acknowledge the board received a letter sent by email from Ms. Jessica Westberg with signatures attached. The board secretary will read the online forms and play voicemails received to comply with the guidelines in the order they were received based upon timestamp of the submittal. Online forms submitted for this meeting, including those that not comply, those that exceeded 20 minutes, and those submitted after 12 p.m. will be shared via email with board members after the meeting. I'll now ask Ms. Lincoln, board secretary, to proceed.
Board members and Superintendent McIntyre, the first form I'll be reading was submitted on June 26, 2020 at 4:55 p.m. by Jill Badinsky. district parent guardian of an enrolled student. We support the resolution developed by board members Kelsey Dawson-Walton and Jackie Mosqueda-Jones to move ISD 279 to a strong anti-racist position in its policies and practices, resources, training, academics, and operation. We were dismayed to witness the flippant response to this resolution during the June 23 board meeting and sincerely hope for a serious discussion and vote on the action item this time. The substance of the resolution should not be waved off over trivial process and protocol issues. As a society, we find ourselves part of an historic wave of support for righting past wrongs. This is not a small brush fire moment in time. This is public recognition and ownership of the embedded prejudices in our power structures and systems that benefit the white majority population and disadvantage the minority people of color in our communities. We need a commitment to change them to reflect anti-racism. The time for change is upon us. We call upon Board Chair Ostafi and all board members to support this proposal and start implementing a new approach to the work of the school board, which truly embodies racial and educational equity across all schools in the district. This is not a radical step. The cities of Minneapolis, Bloomington, Edina, Hopkins, and others have already adopted such measures. Respectfully, the undersigned, Jill and George Budzinski, as well as 175 signatures gathered from Facebook postings, which have been emailed separately to school board members. Next online comment form was submitted on June 26th, 5:27 p.m. Megan Bierce, district parent or guardian of enrolled student. I am writing after watching much of the 623 board meeting, wanting to once again state for the record that as a parent and therapist and human being, I fully support the Osseo School Board adopting the racial equity resolutions put forth by Director Dawson-Walton at that meeting. I thought her action items were very well thought out and encompassing and a fantastic way to start the journey. I am disappointed that it wasn't passed that night, but given that all of the school board members stated at the meeting, one way or another, that they supported these action items related to racial equity and community building with families of all backgrounds, I expect it to be passed at the July board meeting. Our community, including teachers, students, and parents, have all been weighing in on this for months and do not want an excuse of more data needs to be gathered, used to put off taking action. Do the right thing. Join school districts across the country and here in Minnesota in passing a racial equity resolution at the July 21, 2020 meeting. The time for meaningful change is now. To quote Ijeoma Olua from her book, So You Want to Talk About Race, we can get every person in America to feel nothing but love for people of color in their hearts, and if our systems aren't acknowledged and changed, it will bring negligible benefit to the lives of people of color. If you haven't read this book, I highly recommend it as you navigate some difficult yet extremely important conversations in the weeks and months ahead. Megan Bierce, LMFT, Osseo Area Schools parent, volunteer, and resident. Next form, received June 28th, 8:57 a.m. from Angela Bailey Aldrich, Osseo Area Schools employee. I am writing to support the anti-racist actions brought forth by Directors Dawson-Walton and Mosqueda-Jones at the recent board meeting. It has come to my attention that these anti-racist actions are being framed as an attempt to divide our community. Research clearly shows that equitable actions benefit all students. Equity is policy 101 in our district, so I would assume any actions brought forth that support equity would be welcomed. As a teacher, I am angered and confused as to how doing what is best for students needs to be tabled or wordsmithed by board members. History is happening now. We are called now in this moment to do right by our students. Wanting anti-racist actions is in no way controversial or political. It is basic human decency, and to frame it in any other way is unacceptable. Our students, the ones you serve, are calling on you now. Respect and hear the voices of our scholars and families. Next form received June 30th, 10 a.m. from Amy Norasing. I'll spell that Norasingh, district parent or guardian of enrolled student. Excuse me. I am submitting a public comment in support of the resolution originally presented at the June 23rd school board meeting. If we are going to be proud of the fact that we are the third largest diverse student population district, then we need to be clear and present action of what we plan to do going forward to ensure we hold anti-racist views and continue the work to be better for all students, but especially for our BIPOC students who are clearly suffering and struggling at this time. It's clear that what is being done now is still not enough, and that we need to take a stand as a community and as the school board, who is supposed to be the voice of the students and community, to make a bold statement refusing to let racist actions be the norm in this district. That was and is the point of the resolution. My child should not be scared of going to school because he thinks someone will hurt him because of the color of his skin. Is process stopping the board from making a statement in support of the Black community in our district? This could have been done weeks ago, like many other boards who have made statements in support of their district members. A statement does not need a resolution to put forth. Silence is all we've gotten from majority of this board of elected members since May 25th. As elected officials, I expect better from the school board. Action is what is needed now. Action speaks louder than words, and right now your actions are showing that you do not stand or support the diverse communities that make up Osseo area schools. The definition of a resolution is to provide a firm decision to do or not to do something. By voting not to pass this resolution, it is clearly stating the board's position that you are not willing to do the anti-racist work that is required to make our district and its students successful. The resolution is to show that the board understands the issues that are facing our district, our state, our country right now, and are willing and will move forward to be a part of the solution and not the problem. District school boards across Minnesota and the U.S. are passing resolutions for anti-racism because they believe and stand with their community. I'm disappointed that the school board cannot even agree to a path forward claiming process and the work already being done. If you cannot recognize the work being done is not enough and cannot take swift action to make changes to better this district, then I don't think you are listening, learning, and growing in your position. Next form, submitted July 5th at 4 p.m. from Catherine Stone, Osseo Area Schools employee. My educational career has spanned 47 years. I had my own French and English classroom for 38 years in Iowa, and for 6 years was also a TAG facilitator. I was also a nominee for State Teacher of the Year in Iowa. Presently, I sub in Osseo and Robbinsdale. While a full-time high school teacher, our school employed a resource officer. That officer was told of possible suicides, guns brought into the school, and illegal out-of-school activities. Since our school was 56% immigrants, mostly from Mexico and Central America, many were in my French classes. I established close bonds with my students, and never once did I hear a negative comment about the resource officer. During my tenure as a teacher, 3 were employed. They provided a positive presence, and they helped with community relations with children of color. The biggest impact of the SROs was building relationships between administrators, staff, students, parents, and the police department. When one thinks that youth represent a large proportion of the community population, it is important that a relationship is established. Really, everything is about bonds and relationships. I feel the right person as a SRO provides a presence that helps students know the police community. I have subbed numerous times for the Osseo schools and several schools. It seemed to me that the classroom environments were very inclusive, as were the textbooks. What I appreciated most was the kind and assertive discipline for all students. I also appreciate that there is an equity specialist in the school district. My interest in the Osseo School District was personal, as I have a biracial grandchild who will be attending the Osseo schools when he is old enough. Certainly, a teacher grandmother will look out for problems and what is right for the school. In conclusion, I want to thank you for considering my thoughts and for serving on the school board. A lot of thankless time ensuring our children receive a good, equitable education. And next form was submitted July 7th at 11:43 a.m. from Deborah Marie, Osseo parent or guardian of enrolled student. I am the mother of 2 graduates from the Osseo Area School District. One graduated from Osseo Senior High and one from Maple Grove Senior High. I have children in Elm Creek Elementary, and my son-in-law is a graduate of Maple Grove Senior High, so we are closely tied to Osseo Area School District 279. I reviewed the June 23rd Osseo School Board meeting discussion of a resolution on George Floyd and systemic racism brought forward by 2 board members. I am contacting you today to express our deep concerns resulting from that discussion. As a 30-year homeowner, taxpayer, and voter supporting Osseo Area School District 279, I am reaching out to you and requesting these deep concerns be read at the July 21 regular school board meeting. My family, neighbors, and I oppose any resolution rhetoric that takes the board outside our role of focusing on our district and our students and supporting their achievement. We oppose broad statements relating to the political movements and organizations currently ignited by incidents which happened in the city of Minneapolis. Excuse me. My family, neighbors, and I support the work that enables students to achieve and is focused on improving student performance to close the achievement gap of all students by obtaining a proficiency in reading and math by grade 3. We oppose the school board making political statements. We request the board and district focus on efforts that hire teachers of color, build relationships, value each student's individuality and culture, and recognize each student's intrinsic potential and capability to succeed. My family and I oppose equity initiatives that create division, make assumptions about students' lived experiences, and group students into stereotypes based on race. We support work that builds community, kindness, and relationships among students of all backgrounds, race, and ethnicity. We sincerely hope that you will represent us as you were elected to in a manner that emphasizes growth and success for our children and community. Next form was received July 8th at 6:31 p.m. from Dr. Justin Grenage, Grinage, district resident. Dear Osseo School Board, I am writing to you as a concerned community member, teacher, educator, and university professor. After viewing the most recent school board meeting on June 23, I am calling for the board to take action on 2 vital issues. The board should request the immediate resignation of school board member Heather Douglas. The proposed resolution on George Floyd and systemic racism should be swiftly ratified. As a Black university professor who prepares future teachers and researches racism and equity in education, with a particular focus on racial trauma, I am troubled with what I saw during the school board meeting. I fear that irrevocable damage is being done to our community through the lack of dedicated support for racial equity in a severely tragic and traumatic moment for our students and their families. Heather Douglas's apology was not sufficient to begin to rebuild community trust. Since her apology was followed by justifications of the very things she was apologizing for, I do not believe she genuinely showed empathy toward Black and brown community members. In order to rectify community confidence in the district's efforts to embrace racial equity, the board should call for Douglas to step down from her position. While I understand the board has since denounced her social media comments, community trust nonetheless remains fractured. Viewing the narration of the resolution in response to the murder of George Floyd and witnessing the board focus on process arguments rather than validating the eloquent commitments to equity that the board purports to value, it became clear to me that healing our community and student traumas is not a priority. I understand that many board members have requested more time to consider the resolution, but as was stated during the meeting, Osseo is far behind the curve in relation to other neighboring districts in their efforts to affirm that, indeed, Black Lives Matter. By failing to immediately ratify this non-controversial resolution, it signals to our students and their families that racial equity is not an urgent problem. At a time when bold leadership and bravery should guide decision-making, I call for board members to quickly ratify the resolution. This resolution is the first step in the long process of helping our community heal our racial wounds and to demonstrating that Osseo is committed to racial equity in their schools. If board members are dragging their feet on this initial step, then I have little confidence that when more challenging issues emerge, the board will have the necessary courage to address them. Sincerely, Dr. Justin Grenage, Assistant Professor, Literacy Education, English Education Licensures Program Coordinator, Department of Curriculum and Instruction, University of Minnesota. Next form was received July 12th at 7:54 a.m. from Jesse King Hansen, parent or guardian of an enrolled student. Dear board members, I was hoping one of the white-passing members of this board would have initiated a resolution denouncing systemic racism in District 279 following the murder of George Floyd and the resulting worldwide uprising. I am disgusted that it was the only black board member who did the heavy lifting of initiating this proposal. When she invited you all to join her efforts, only one member responded. While I'm grateful for that show of support, I am disgusted that more of you didn't respond. Your response might have been, Kelsey, as a black woman, you've already fought harder than the rest of us your entire life to overcome systemic racism. You sit this one out. We've got this. You might have written your own proposal, asking for her expertise in oppression and what is needed to overcome it. If you'd have all created your own resolution the week of George Floyd's murder, our district could have shown our black community that we denounce systemic racism. Instead, you demonstrated your own racism by voting against the proposal Kelsey created. Your no votes caused trauma to our black students and families. While they were protesting your racism at Park Center during the June 23rd school board meeting, you voted no to a denouncement of racism. When you voted no, you showed where your values are. You showed that you value process and protocol over shutting down your own racism. You don't need more time and more process. Your time is up. You should have beat Kelsey to this work. I, as a white teacher and parent of daughters in this district, have been inspired by the recent uprising in our community and around the world. I am committed to amplifying black voices. I am inspired to look for my own white bias every day. I will call out racism when I see it in myself, my students, my family members, and members of this community I hold so dear. And I expect those who care about me most to hold me accountable when my white bias shows up. I'm asking you to vote yes to this resolution. I'd like you to apologize for and acknowledge the harm you caused by failing to write your own resolution denouncing systemic racism. I'd like you to apologize to our black students and families for the harm you caused by demanding more time and more process, which is the opposite of what they needed from you. We need you to lead and take action tonight. Jessie Hansen, Rice Lake teacher, mom to daughters at Maple Grove Middle and Maple Grove Senior. Next form was received July 18th at 9:17 p.m. from Deb Peterson, parent or guardian of enrolled student. I am writing in support of adopting the guidelines on anti-racism that were proposed by board members Mosqueda Jones and Dawson Walton. Their recommendations are the least that the district can do to restructure its procedures and curriculum to be actively inclusive and openly promote awareness of discriminatory practices and teachings. Ask yourself what you learned in school about any U.S. history subject. What point of view was portrayed? Whose story wasn't told? How is the event being described? A few years ago, there was a question on a test in one of 279's elementary classes that was phrased like this: true or false, all parties benefited from the Columbian Exchange. A student answered false and was marked incorrect. She explained that the enslaved persons involved in the trade did not benefit and was still marked wrong. Obviously, this lesson was being told from the point of view of the traders and not the traded, and is but one example of how systemic racism is prevalent throughout curriculums. The above is only one reason of why anti-racist policies should be adopted by this district. We are responsible for the success of all of our students, and that means doing the work to undo centuries of oppression. You may be thinking, none of this is my fault, but as we continue to let racism go unchecked, we all become accomplices in its dissemination. Next form received July 19th at 3:24 p.m. from Elizabeth Sheel Keita, Keita, parent or guardian of an enrolled student. My family supports the original wording of the resolution on George Floyd and systemic racism, and we expect the school board to stand up and support the students of color in this district who are tired of the racism getting in the way of their education. Next form. That alarm means that 20 minutes has expired. Would you like me to continue?
Okay. Thank you, Sherry. I believe that we have had a lot of good input on both sides or around this issue, so I don't want to take sides or say sides. So thank you very much, and I think we can move on to the next agenda item. Next agenda item is the superintendent's report. Mr. McIntyre.
All right, thank you, Chair Ostafi. So tonight, it is my pleasure to formally announce 2 new leaders in our school district. And I was hoping to do this in person, at an in-person meeting. But with the uncertainty of when that can happen, coupled with the fact that these 2 leaders have already begun their service in their new roles, I'm excited to introduce them tonight. And first, I'm pleased to announce that Michael Lehan has been selected this past spring as the Assistant Superintendent of Equity and Achievement and started effective July 1st. He's a seasoned veteran already. Michael came to District 279 in 2009, and he served in many administrative roles, most recently as principal at Osseo Senior High School for the past 5 years. Michael has demonstrated unyielding commitment to his scholars and staff while at Osseo Senior High. And Michael was recognized recently by the Minnesota Association of Secondary Schools Principals as the High School Principal of the Year. And Osseo High School was just named recently as well as U.S. World and News Report Best High School for the 3rd consecutive year. So that speaks to Michael's work in and of itself. Michael's attributes and both recognitions to the brilliance of the scholars he serves and his dedication that he serves with really will help him serve in his new role. By way of background, Michael holds a Bachelor of Science in Family Social Science with a minor in Youth Studies from the University of Minnesota. He also played a little sports on the side, and a master's degree from St. Mary's University in Educational Leadership. Michael obtained his EDS degree from the University of St. Thomas, where he's currently working on his doctorate as well. So Michael is committed. I've seen it very evident in my short time in the district to working on behalf of scholars, families, staff members of the Osseo area schools, commitment to our mission, and highly focused on equitable student achievement. And he's very enthusiastic and energized in stepping into this new role. It's very obvious even in the first couple weeks of his new role here. So we're very proud to welcome Michael to his new position. Based on the uniqueness of this virtual way of doing this, I'm going to ask Michael just to jump in and give him a few seconds to address the board.
Chair Ostafi, board members, just want to say thank you certainly for your support, certainly Superintendent McIntyre for this opportunity. I'm excited for this new adventure, this new journey, this new chapter in my professional career. Certainly I'm convicted around this district, spent many years in this district, and I'm hopeful that I can come alongside each of you to achieve the vision, the mission, and the strategic objectives of this district. And just thank you for your support, and I'm excited to work in closer collaboration with each of you. So thank you for this opportunity.
All right, thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.
Also, I'm very pleased to announce Amy Janisek as our new district level principal. She's also on the call with us tonight. Amy has served in education in a variety of capacities for over 20 years, and most recently as the principal of Irondale High School for the past 4 years. Her additional leadership experiences include serving as a principal at Ramsey Middle School, now Justice Page Middle School in Minneapolis Public Schools, and also as an associate principal at Wayzata High School. Prior to her administrative experiences, she served as an equity and access grant coordinator and district middle school lead with Minneapolis Public Schools. Amy has teaching experience in social studies at the high school level, and she believes these diverse experiences serving in both urban and suburban communities really prepared her for this unique opportunity with Osseo area schools. Amy holds a bachelor's degree in social studies education and psychology and a master's degree in curriculum and instruction. She obtained her administrative license from St. Mary's University. She strongly believes that in elevating student voices in order to achieve authentic engagement where students feel valued and a part of their school communities in order to achieve success. She looks forward to serving the students, staff, and families of Osseo area schools through listening, collaboration, and partnership. So we're also very proud to welcome Amy to her new position. Amy's also, again, like I said, on this call, so I'm going to give Amy just a brief moment to address the board.
Hi, good evening, members of the board and Superintendent McIntyre. I am so grateful to be joining Osseo Area Schools, and as an outsider looking in, you have a reputation of innovation and strong leadership in the work that you're doing. And I'm incredibly grateful to get to know the talented and passionate team and leaders across this district, as well as all of you as board members, and really looking forward to upholding the vision and mission and bringing strengths that I have and experiences to help everybody learn and grow in this community. So thank you very much for this opportunity and for the very, very warm welcome.
All right, thank you, Amy, and please join me in welcoming Michael and Amy into their new roles in Osseo area schools. Thank you. All right, and I did give them permission to jump off the call, except for Michael. I think he's got to stay on, but Amy is free to go. So, just a few additional items for my superintendent's update. I'll be brief. I just wanted to briefly address the start of the upcoming school year. I know it's on everybody's minds more and more every day, and I know our students, families, and staff are all anxiously awaiting the guidance from the state and our district's plan for what the start of the school year will be. So while we wait for that guidance, I do want to thank everyone for their patience and thank all of those who have participated in the opportunities to provide us with valuable feedback, not only from our work this past spring, but providing us input on our planning for the upcoming year. So we're going to continue to plan for those three scenarios, and there's a report later tonight with more information. Also, the deadline to apply this for our community members, the deadline to apply for temporary appointment to the vacant school board seat is this Friday at 4:30, and details are on our district website. And filing for the November school board election begins Tuesday, June 28th, and continues through August 11th. And again, information is on the district website. And then finally, I'm very excited for this announcement. Our virtual commencement ceremonies will take place this Saturday, July 25th. Park Center Senior High is at 11 a.m., Osseo Senior High at 2 p.m., and Maple Grove Senior High at 6 p.m. All three ceremonies will be live streamed on ccxmedia.org and available on the district YouTube channel. And I know an amazing amount of work has gone into planning these virtual ceremonies. It's a first thing for us. We've never done this before, and I have been able to preview the ceremonies, and it's amazing. They're going to really do a great job honoring our seniors. So I'm just super excited, and please join me in that excitement and honoring our graduating seniors on Saturday. So Chair Ostafi, that concludes my superintendent's report this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent McIntyre. Next agenda item is school board reports. Director Simons, do you have a report or update?
No reports this time.
Thank you. Director Douglas, do you have a committee report or update?
I do not have any reports at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Dawson-Walton, do you have a committee report or update?
I do not.
Thank you. Director Mosqueda-Jones, do you have a committee report or update?
You'll be shocked and amazed that I do not.
Okay, and at this time, I do not. That's the quickest agenda item we've done. Next up is the presentation for district planning, advisory council recommendations for 2020-21. And that will be with Jeremy Woolley, Jolene, Robin Gonzalez, and Sarah Linsett. Welcome, and we're looking forward to the meeting or the presentation.
Good evening, school board members, Superintendent McIntyre, cabinet members, and members of the viewing audience. My name is Jeremy Woolley, and I am the Director of Learning and Achievement for Osseo Area Schools. I'm delighted to be here tonight with our DPAC committee to share with you our work and recommendations for the 2019-2020 school year. DPAC is an acronym for the District Planning Advisory Council, and this committee is made up of very dedicated members that meet on a regular basis and then conclude the school year with recommendations to the school board and superintendent for consideration. I have had the privilege of being able to work with this group in my capacity as the Director of Learning and Achievement. Throughout this time, I've had the opportunity to work closely with Amanda Heller, Vice Chair of the District Planning Advisory Council, and it is my sincere pleasure to introduce you to her at this time to begin our presentation this evening. Amanda.
Thanks, Jeremy. Good evening. DPAC membership is based on interest and is open to the entire community. Members can include up to 2 representatives from each elementary building, 3 representatives from each secondary building, 6 non-parents from the community, 6 district teachers, 6 administrators, 3 students from each high school, and 1 school board member. The membership term is 1 year. The purpose of the council is to integrate community members along with professional staff in a combined effort to evaluate the existing district programs, policies, and objectives. It also includes 2 subcommittees with specific focus areas. The Program Assessment and Review Subcommittee gathers information, identifies trends, and analyzes needs related to educational programming. The Student Services Subcommittee reviews the student support service areas that enhance and supplement regular education programs. The council identifies areas with room for improvement, makes recommendations, evaluates progress towards existing objectives, and we report the findings and recommendations to the entire school community. Tonight, a few representatives are here to share a brief description of a few high priority issues that we identified last fall and researched during the school year. At this time, I would like to introduce Matt Lyson to share information regarding our first high priority recommendation for this year.
All right, good evening. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Jeremy. And thank you to our school board members, Superintendent McIntyre, and cabinet members for your time and for your service to the families of District 279. Our first high priority recommendation for this year focuses on online learning opportunities. With our students, family, and staff experiencing 9 weeks of distance learning this past spring, online learning is an obvious priority. But I feel it's important to point out that this committee's interest in this topic started long before the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. Beginning last fall, this committee collected data regarding current enrollments at North Star Online. We also examined current online opportunities within our system, specifically through the Osseo Excel Online Academy at Osseo Senior High. While examining this topic, we formed several beliefs that you can see in our report, most notably that offering in-house online learning opportunities not only increases exploratory opportunities for students, which thus enhances their school experience, but also retains revenue for our district. Furthermore, we believe that the aforementioned 9 weeks of distance learning this past spring have provided us with a potential wealth of data to leverage as we continue to develop online courses. With that said, this committee recommends that Osseo area schools expands and enhances district-wide online opportunities for all secondary students. To that end, we offer several potential strategies for improvement. Those strategies include, but are not limited to, the training of staff, onboarding of students enrolled in online courses, the development of course evaluations, and most notably, the examination of ways in which our in-house online courses can be made available to all secondary students in our district. At this time, I'd like to introduce Robin Moe to share information regarding our second high priority recommendation for the year.
Thank you, Matt. Our second high priority recommendation examines the length of the school day and implementations needed to enhance learning experience across all grade levels. Time is a fixed variable in the school day. The proposed initiatives to add programming compete with the necessary instructional minutes and potentially dilute existing initiatives and reduce instructional time. By adding as little as 10 minutes per day, students have an opportunity to gain 377 hours over 13 years of academic instruction, which could be utilized in social and emotional learning opportunities, world language instruction, STEM and STEAM programming, middle school or elementary recess, an addition of a 7th hour at our high schools, or additional minutes in content areas such as art, science, health, or social studies. We've compared Osseo to 6 neighboring districts and St. Paul to find that 2 districts, high schools with 20-minute longer days, 1 district with 15-minute longer, 3 districts that have high schools with 10-minute longer, and 1 district having the same length as Osseo. At the middle school level, we found 1 district with 20-minute longer days, 2 districts that are 15, 2 districts that are 10 minutes longer, and 2 districts with the same length as our days. And finally, at the elementary level, 2 districts having days that are 10 minutes longer, and 2 districts have days that are 10 minutes less, and the remaining 3 districts have the same length as Osseo. In addition to lengthening the school day for all students, we provide additional time for our district to continue its work towards our world's best workforce goals of ensuring 3rd graders can read at grade level, preparing students for career and college, aiding students in graduating from high school, achieving additional benchmarks with regards to closing our achievement gaps, and promoting social and emotional learning initiatives. At this time, I would like to introduce Rose Tunn to share information regarding our 3rd high priority recommendation for this year.
Thanks, Robin, and good evening. Our 3rd high priority recommendation for this year focuses on implementing changes to school start times as a way to enhance learning experiences across all grade levels district-wide. While there are several studies published for review on this topic, we encourage the board to review the 2014 study from the University of Minnesota, which is referenced and cited in our final report. This multi-year study of 8 schools in 3 states showed increased academic performance, increased attendance, decreased tardiness, positive mental health effects, and even a reduction in car accidents involving teen drivers when school start times were shifted to 8:30 a.m. or later. A few districts in the state of Minnesota have implemented later start times for high school students, most notably St. Paul Public Schools, whose demographics complement the demographics of District 279. Wayzata Public Schools approved later start times for high school students in the 2016 through 2017 academic year. And most recently, St. Louis Park adopted later start times for high school students, which will start in the upcoming 2020 through 2021 academic year. We recognize that there are many considerations and stakeholders to consult should the board and district leadership choose to pursue this recommendation. However, based on studies citing improved academic performance and positive mental and physical health effects, we strongly believe that this recommendation is worth pursuing, whatever the outcome. At this time, I would like to introduce Stacy Yurchak to share information regarding our final high priority recommendation for this year.
Good evening. Our final high priority recommendation for this year focuses on social emotional learning. We are recommending that the district implement a consistent, evidence-based social emotional learning program, including a scope and sequence for all students pre-K through 12. According to Castle, children with greater social emotional competence are more likely to be ready for college, succeed in their careers, have positive relationships, and better mental health and become engaged citizens. For example, a Columbia University study indicated that the average return on investment for the 6 evidence-based programs studied is 11 to 1. For every dollar invested, there is an $11 return. This benefit was calculated from economic value of achievement gains. We recommend that Osseo area schools establish a district-wide social emotional learning committee that includes students, parents, community members, related service providers, administration, teachers, and equity team members that is representative of our community. In addition to program adoption, we recommend that a plan be designed to measure the implementation fidelity and impact on achievement of the adopted social emotional learning program. Our intent is to provide an equitable scope and sequence of social emotional skills instruction for each pre-K through 12 student in our system. Implementing an evidence-based social emotional program for each student aligns with the district mission and our commitment to inspire each student with the confidence, courage, and competence to achieve their dreams and engage in a lifetime of learning. I'm going to turn it over to Robin to close our presentation.
Good evening. The recommendations presented to you this evening were designed with much thought and care with the belief that these actions will bring us closer to achieving our district mission and increasing student engagement and achievement. This concludes our presentation this evening. On behalf of the entire District Planning Advisory Council, we would like to thank you for your time and your consideration of our efforts.
Thank you very much. Board members, are there any questions? And let's start with the list we have from agenda items. Director Simons, do you have any questions for the team?
No questions, just comments. Robin and Jeremy and team, thank you so much. I was just looking through the very detailed reports. I appreciate the degree of effort and study that these recommendations have behind them. I think this is one of the best DPAC presentations we've had with the degree of focus on really clear recommendations with the backup. So I appreciate how that committee is really becoming better and better at what you do. So I think the school start times is a really interesting recommendation that we've had some discussion on before, and we've had some discussion as a board as well as how do we enhance listening sessions that maybe are more topical. So this would be one that I think would be really valuable for broader community input. And we'll, as we look at our strategic plan for the year and for the next 3 years, that's something I think we should consider slating in for broader input. The Social Emotional Learning Committee, I wonder if that's something that as DPAC having oversight over curriculum could enhance their potential review over. So as we see the role of DPAC and offering recommendations, how can maybe some of these specific curricular items fit under that existing authority? So that'd be something we have to consider with our overall advisory committees and where the best fit for that is. I really appreciate the ideas, and I think they warrant further study. According to our plan and our strategic plan, how we do that, as well as community inputs. I hope we can continue to bring these forward for those next steps.
Thank you, Director Simons. Director Douglas, do you have any questions or comments?
Thank you. I also don't have any questions. I serve on DPAC and I have really enjoyed working with all of the members. I strongly support all of the recommendations brought forth by the committee or the council. I'm sorry. This group of people has worked really, really hard on exactly what Tanya said, really being really concise and specific about what the recommendations are and why they're being recommended. The effort that's been put into it has been tremendous, and the thought. And I just want to add that I think that this particular group of people, despite the decrease in member participation, has put forth the greatest amount of effort that I've seen and consideration for what our district's needs are in a really holistic way. And I just can't stress enough how important these recommendations are, and that I strongly support them. And as a board, I think that we need to move forward with all of the recommendations as best we can. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Douglas. Director Dawson-Walton. Any comments or questions? Uh-oh, we can't hear you again. Nope. While you fix that, let's go on to Director Mosqueda Jones.
Okay, so as the teacher in the house, I have some questions about this. First of all, I want to say thank you for your efforts.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Okay, sorry, I'm
Okay.
back.
We'll come back to you.
Okay, so I just want to say I appreciate all your work. I think these are 4 incredibly important recommendations, so I appreciate that. some questions I have are, in thinking about increasing our online offerings, have we, did you have any discussions on ESP roles in some of this, or teachers to do some more I saw a little bit in the report about maybe doing some collaborative where there might be a teacher at Osseo that has some expertise, but they do a class with all 3 high schools, that kind of thing, right? So what other discussions did you have like that, or like for special ed, are there any ESPs that could do something similar, or are we just like really high level right now? We'll get into the nitty gritty later.
I can answer that. I think the conversation that we had was exactly what you said at the end, very high level. I can't recall a time that we were specifically discussing the role of ESPs in course development. I think what we were really doing is looking at some of the experiences that were being developed and provided at Osseo Senior High School, and really talking about ways that we can expand that so that students at Maple Grove Senior High and Park Center had an opportunity to participate in similar course offerings as well. So that was kind of the genesis of the conversation, in addition to how do we recapture some of those North Star online enrollments and bring those students back to our system, which has been a focus of our group for a number of years.
Sure. I was just reminded of Northview showed us an initiative where they had a student that was way above all of their math curriculum, and they had him working in some online programs, and it seems to be that might be an area to tap into. So if we have students that are liars from the general in one particular area, that they might be able to get their needs met through that type of thing. So I appreciate that. Another comment I have, it seems to me like recommendation 2 and 3 might be something that we have to look at together a little bit, because if we're going to change start times and we're going to change how long they are, and all the nitty gritty that happens with that, with childcare and buses and I'm sure you already thought of that. And then I also want to say, just from personal experience, Columbia Heights has been doing the opposite start times as Osseo for over 10 years. I start my workday at 7 o'clock in the morning with elementary students. And we have found that developmentally, for every single one of those age levels, that it worked better. So not just for the high school students, but it also works better for the middle school and the elementary school, because their natural biological clocks are in that way. And then when we're talking about social emotional learning, I just want to put my plug in to make sure that when we're doing that, it's going to have to be, I know Director Simons talked a little bit about which area might be the oversight, but in my mind, it needs to be cross areas, because of the social emotional. It needs to be with curriculum, but it also needs to be with student services, because of the line that we have to figure out where we're drawing with all that, and the referrals we'll have to make if we're doing those kinds of things. Oh, and then I just, for the public, CASEL was mentioned, and I just want to tell the public that CASEL we use a lot of acronyms in education. And so I just want to say that it is the Collaborative for Academic and Social and Emotional Learning. It is an organization that's been around a long time and has worked with social and emotional learning and academic connection to all that. And they're pretty well known and respected in the field. So I just wanted to pop that in.
All right. Thank you, Director Mosqueda Jones. Director Dawson Walton.
Hi. Well, I wanted to say first that when I looked at the membership of the advisory council, I mean, it's quite the dynamic group of throughout the district, and very forward thinking, and I'm just really pleased with these recommendations, and I think they're very, very timely as we really rethink. I mean, we're going to hear in the next presentation, but I think we all know all over social media, all over the conversation is what is this year going to look like? And all of these four they're essential to when we think about how we want to, this is our time to really re-envision how our students experience their academics and their life, their school life for the 13 years that they're there, the 377 hours. So I think it's very timely. The one question I would have or comment, with all of this, whether you're talking about distance learning or online opportunities, there's continues to be kind of acknowledgement of access to internet, strong internet connections, and I just think that has to always be part of what we're considering as a district, and working with other districts, because I know it's an issue that the whole state faces, from rural Minnesota to the city. So but other than that, I mean, I really, we've heard about a lot of this, and just through, like Director Simons mentioned, at work sessions, and so it's nice to see the thinking behind this, behind these four. So thank you so much for your time and your dedication to this work.
Thank you, Director Dawson Walton, and to the DPAC team, thank you very much. This was, again, probably one of the most thorough and most researched and professional presentations we've had, and I thank you for that. I thank you for the time and effort that went into that, and for sometimes your courage of being up in front of here for everybody to see in a big checkerboard and across the district. So thank you for that. Thank you for your effort. I believe that all of these are in the queue to discuss in our strategic planning process. These are things that individually or in groups the board members have brought forth, and I think there is support for pretty much every single one of those. I've been talking about the online schools, and I've been a big supporter of Assistant Superintendent Lehan. He knows we've had several discussions about that, start times, day length. These are all things that have been coming up in conversations over the past several years, and I thank you for bringing these forward in such a good manner, and something that you feel is representing parents and teachers and students, that this is something that we should look into. So thank you very much for doing that. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, Chair Ostafi, Superintendent McIntyre, I'd like to jump in here. I'm raising my hand, but it's hard to see sometimes. Just a quick thank you to the committee. I want to echo some of the thoughts of the board members with the really strong focus and level of detail. So these recommendations were well researched and easy to understand, and the clarity around this was really well done. And then I just want to also echo what was just commented on. All four of these are currently in our strategic plan over the next 3 years, to whether they're starting out in some of our learning work where we would study, pilot, collect data before a large scale implementation, or whether that's this year or next year, the following year. A lot of this kind of hinges on how this year goes, and we are racing like most districts are with the online learning component now, with gradual expansion this year and next year, and we've laid that out in our strategic plan over multiple years. So I just really, again, want to come back to thanking this committee and their forward thinking on all these. So thank you very much.
And I do want to say that I think the committee's work in the past year certainly helped jumpstart some of our learning and some of the things that as a board we needed to look into. So thank you for preparing us and preparing that space. Thank you.
Chair Ostafi?
Yes.
I just have one question for Superintendent McIntyre. I know that we had a conversation that some of those online programs have quite a process to get approved from the state. Are we starting to do that fairly soon, because it'll take a while so that we can implement it?
We are, and you're going to hear more about that in our next presentation. And if you still have some questions about that, we'll answer those then too. So thanks for queuing us up. That's awesome.
And with that, our next agenda item is the fall planning update, and that presentation is going to be led by Superintendent McIntyre and District Administration. Superintendent McIntyre.
Thank you so much. We have another large group to present to you tonight, and we're going to take a little more time than normal because of the unique position we're in and really making sure we give a strong high-level overview of the work. We've been at this for about 6 weeks in a very intensive fashion, and you're going to see that in the presentation tonight. I'm going to just set this up a little bit with some of my comments. The first 2 or 3 slides I'm going to cover in my comments with kind of where we've come and where we stand today and where we're going. In mid-June, as you all know, the Minnesota Department of Health and Minnesota Department of Education outlined 3 likely scenarios for the start of the school year and directed all districts to prepare for those 3 scenarios. We were told that final guidance from the state will be provided next week, the week of July 27th. Although we are all hopeful it might come sooner, we're still banking on that coming next week. So briefly, those 3 scenarios, number 1 is in-person learning for all students, and number 2 is a hybrid model with in-person learning with strict social distancing and capacity limits. And number 3, distance learning only, which evolved from the version that we did this past spring. So like I said, we started this planning June 8th. We anticipated this coming. We didn't wait for that announcement, and that gave us a jump start on the work to launch our process, and I'll cover that in just a minute. While we've been engaged in this process, there's 3 key pieces I wanted to share with you. So over those 6 weeks, we also accomplished some other efforts. So number 1, we completed a second round of distance learning survey work that gave us a little bit of feedback on how we performed from May to the end of the year. We also launched a survey for getting input on what do people want to see from us starting this year. And we have some preliminary, I'm going to be able to share a little bit of the preliminary data, and we hope to have the final analysis done as we finalize our plan moving forward in the next couple of weeks. So our timing was good. But preliminary information indicates, and I'm just going to give you some high-level numbers here for some comparisons, that about 68% of our families like the in-person learning option. 66% also like the hybrid model. So we have 2 clear winners here. The distance learning option was not a favorite in comparison. And a couple other just high-level themes here that we learned through our surveys was if we go back in a hybrid scenario, the most favored was that students do go to school parts of every week. So not alternating weeks, but go to school for parts of some days of each week of school. And I'll talk a bit more about that. Our families, especially, also really favored mostly, of all the options for reducing COVID-19 transmissions. These aren't too surprising, but the most favored were frequent hand washing and sanitizing routines, frequent cleaning of high-touch surface areas, not sharing objects and disinfecting between uses, and then temperature checks for staff and students before going into buildings. The least favored for reducing transmission was staggering school start times and dismissal times, keeping students in their homeroom class throughout the day to reduce mixing students. Those were the 2 least favored that came through. Also, there is a desire to also provide an option for families to just opt in to a distance learning model for those who just aren't ready or don't want to send their children to school. We also completed a thought exchange, survey or collection of information, which is a crowdsourcing tool. And we asked families to respond anonymously to some broad open-ended questions and see where that takes us. And for those who participated, they can see other respondents' ideas. It's not identifiable, and they can kind of rate those ideas and play off of those ideas and ones that they consider important, and then kind of build on those things. And what we learned overall was stakeholders think safety, high quality instruction, and really giving consideration to the impact on families are all the high level themes that surfaced from that particular effort. Another piece of information I want to share was early to middle of July, on 2 different days, all the area metro school district leaders got together and shared kind of their planning and their efforts, and really to kind of dial in on the hybrid learning model because it's the most challenging. And over 30 school districts participated in that around the metro. And there are some common themes and challenges identified around the region. The biggest challenge is transportation and sorting out all the components around transportation. Also building and classroom capacity, especially if there's limitations on capacity. That includes childcare and how many children in the child to adult ratios we can have. Also, families, another challenge is how to build that option out for families who do not want to send their children back for in-person instruction. And what we're learning around the region, and it ranges anywhere from 6 to 15% is kind of the range, and the state number was 12%. So we're kind of seeing that as some markers for how much, and for us, that gets us in the range of 2,000 to 4,000 students if we think about our enrollment. Some additional items identified as challenges are just sufficient staffing, and especially those staff who have school-age children of their own, and how can we make sure we're fully staffed, and then also those staff with any compromised health issues. Regarding the hybrid models, there was a clear movement across the metro to be looking at an AB or AABB model. So that means students coming to school 2 days in a row, basically 2 days a week, and then putting a day in the week around asynchronous learning, cleaning, and professional development. And so you're basically serving half of your enrollment 2 days and the other half, the other two, based on the current guidelines that we have from the state. To go any more than that, districts would violate those requirements. So we'll see if those stay intact or not as we learn more, hopefully next week. Lastly, as many of you saw, the Department of Education survey showed that about 64% of the respondents that they had were comfortable sending students back to school, and ours was 66 to 68. So we're close as a district. And again, they had 12% of their respondents would say they wouldn't be comfortable sending theirs back, and we were more in the 6 to 8% range in our preliminary analysis. But again, we're finalizing those results very quickly. So that's a little background. As you get ready to see the presentation tonight, I'm just going to give a quick overview of how we came to be with this process and then turn it over to our team. Our fall 2020 opening planning process consisted of 67 team members representing employees across the district, including our union representation or our union representatives. And our cabinet served as the steering committee. We had a core planning team of that 67-member team. And then we broke those into 4 work groups: instructional core, operations, resources, and communications and stakeholder engagement. Those 4 work groups in the last 6 weeks combined have had 41 meetings. And so normally when this is kind of a downtime, they've been really intensely working on this. And I do want to take a moment to personally thank all the staff for their hard work on these teams. You know, like I said, typically most would be not working, or if they're off, kind of taking a break from the prior year and recharging to get ready for the next year. This team did not have that opportunity. They jumped right in and stepped up. And similar to our experience in March, when we had to put together our new way of providing school in just a few short days, this team did step up and put in a lot of hours in a short period of time. And we'll keep working on this moving forward. So tonight, our facilitators and members of those 4 work groups are going to share with you the process each work group followed, the highlights and key features of the plan that put together for each of the 3 scenarios to date. Once we do have that final guidance, we'll finalize the plan. We're expecting by no later than mid-August, if not sooner, and then launch a communications effort regarding that plan. So board members, I'm just going to ask respectfully that if you can make note of your questions as we go along and save them for the end of the presentation, then once you've heard everything, because sometimes things get answered as we get through the content, that might help you focus your questions at the end. Likely
so you don't want to be here all night, is what you're saying?
There will, and I want to point out, just like when we went into distance learning, there's going to be more questions that we're either going to follow up on, or as new information comes out, you'll have new questions. So I will put in a place for board members to ask questions so that all of you receive the same information while getting it to you in a reasonable amount of time. So to start our presentation tonight, I'm going to turn it over to Assistant Superintendent for Elementary Schools, Steve Flisk, who will share with you the results of our planning for our instructional core work group. And I know he's got a few leaders with him to help out. So thank you, Steve.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Ostafi, Superintendent McIntyre, directors, cabinet, and our viewing audience. I have the pleasure of providing a brief overview of the work that has been accomplished by the Fall 2020 Instructional Core Work Group over the last few weeks, feels like months. In addition, you will hear from Rob Nelson, principal of Woodland, Brian Chance, principal of Osseo Middle School, and Bart Becker, principal of Maple Grove Senior High. Each facilitated a group tasked with generating a plan for each scenario particular to their level. I want to thank all the volunteers that worked together to address the charge of framing out these three scenarios, as Corey mentioned, in person, hybrid, and distance. Although we know that much more work will need to be done operationalizing each of the scenarios, we are confident that we're on the right track. As the instructional core group, our primary function was to determine what our instructional programs will aspire to in each of the three scenarios. However, everything that we've discussed has been through the lens of providing a safe and nurturing environment for all our students that will be supportive of the academic and social emotional needs of our students and staff as they return. Slide, please. Here is a quick overview of how we organized our work and the volunteers. As you see here, as I mentioned, we broke our large group into three smaller groups, pre-K 5, middle, and high school, which were facilitated by our three principals. We also, in the course, developed a charter to really help us hone in and identify goals and timelines and expectations because of the short frame of time that we had to work together. To enhance transparency, we utilized a common planning document that was visible to each of the subgroups. And in that, each of the groups were identifying the assumptions and non-negotiables and questions that were generated as they were planning in each of the scenario. And these questions were shared across the different groups. Of course, we reviewed and discussed the MD and MDH guidelines and other examples that we were able to get from school districts. And as Corey mentioned, looked at some of the survey data and feedback that we had from parents, teachers, and administrators. And also during the course, you'll hear from the principals, gathered some of that from those participants. Next slide, please. So we were the largest group, 23 voluntary members. So this included district admin, school admin, our teachers, directors, coordinators from Learning and Achievement, Department of Educational Equity and Student Services, to mention a few. So we held these planning sessions over the 4 weeks. And during the course of the time, we added additional teachers to increase that teacher voice and balance in our groups. And I do want to make a special shout out and thank you to Kelly Wilson, who was there for us when we needed, found us those individuals. So thank you to Kelly Wilson. Next slide, please. So as the groups worked together, they developed important assumptions and expectations that needed to guide their work together. And as I had mentioned, safety was first and foremost, so our plans needed to be informed by the guidance. We were fortunate as the guidance was updated the first week of our planning, so we could craft our plans with the latest information available to us. And so you see on the slide here, these are some of the expectations and things that the groups kept in their mind as they were doing their planning. As I mentioned, the safety guidelines that were available to us, and they were pretty comprehensive, so you can imagine the time it took to go through those documents, but it was worthwhile. And of course, our special ed and EL services were to be provided for in each scenario. IEP meetings. There's also the intention for a distance learning plan accommodation. This critical collaboration between grade level and content area and EL teachers will be prioritized and planned. So as they're looking together and working together, these are the things that they were generating. This notion of focusing on essential learnings, as we know our charge was to be able to be nimble to switch between these learning models. And so part of that involves increased use of flipped model instruction, which you're going to hear a little bit more about from our principals. Attendance will follow our MDE guidelines. Learning will be assessed using these standards-based grading practices. And also, and importantly, we are expecting that our schools will submit a site-level COVID-19 safety plan before the start of the year. So we want to make sure, as we said, we're We're following the guidelines and preparing our schools to receive the students no matter what scenario we land in. Next slide, please. So as you see here, kind of dumping into the key features, so our in-person model. So in general, with the in-person model, we see that learning is going to be occurring, 5 days a week. And to help you kind of help us and everyone kind of frame it, to the extent possible, this would look like what it looked like in our schools pre-COVID, with some nuances and some changes. So seating changes, arrangements, following the recommended guidelines, additional space and procedures will need to be clarified, as we prepare for meals for students. And a big focus of what we talked about, especially in this model, is this emphasis on social emotional learning and the need to really rebuild student and staff relationships as they return to the building. So with that, I'd like to actually invite our principals into this conversation here and ask them if they have some things they would like to share, especially around this notion of addressing the potential learning gaps and our social emotional needs as they generated from their conversations. So let me invite Rob Nelson. Are you on?
I am on. Yes, thank you. Is everybody able to hear me just fine? All right. Well, thank you all for the opportunity to speak with you this evening. As Steve said, the work was really important. We had a lot of people thinking through how this might look to address, especially the social emotional needs of students. And it's a little bit akin to almost a trauma informed instruction, because these kids they're going through some things that never before would ever any of us have imagined. And so the first 6 weeks at an elementary level are pretty paramount anyway to establish routines and procedures in an in-person environment. But like Steve mentioned, the word nimble keeps coming up. We are also charged with recognizing that we may shift in and out of models as the year goes. And so those first 6 weeks take on the added features of utilizing technology right off the bat, maybe creating the idea of parent academies to get them to come in to review technology expectations and how instruction will look different in an in-person model and how it could then change into a hybrid model. As far as the learning gaps, at an elementary level, you essentially take on the model that you can't intervene your way out of gaps, and you can't intervene your way out of areas where students are struggling. You address it first and foremost through a tight core instruction that's aligned to standards. At an elementary level, standards are incremental in nature, and so it really is important to do some detailed assessments at the beginning of the year, not only for the social emotional needs, but for those areas in which there's now deficiencies based on some of the things that happened in the fall. And of course, utilizing our equity planning tools to be able to deliver that content in ways that help students be able to show what they know. Some of the other things that we would focus on, the referral and assessment process, a lot of those things got put on hold. And so that there are kids who are really in need of additional support at an elementary level, really across all levels. Those were put on hold because we didn't have the ability to follow through on the evaluations and the assessments that were required. So we would have to prioritize that as another way of really identifying some of those things. And then finally, at the elementary level, as I mentioned, there's going to be a need based on the social distancing guidelines and MDH recommendations. Materials are they're huge in the learning process at the elementary level. The manipulation of materials to learn mathematical concepts, things like that, that's going to be a little bit more difficult to do. And so the increased use of technology through a learning management system that's a common pre-K 5 for students to be able to show that learning will help us to prepare for if we do need to go into hybrid and or distance. And so those are just a couple of the elementary perspectives on an in-person model.
Excuse me, I'm really sorry, you guys. Chair Ostafi?
Yes.
I am having an emergency. One of my kids needs to go to the hospital right now. She can't breathe. So I need to leave the meeting.
Okay. Sorry to hear that. Please take care of family first.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
So I apologize, everybody. I'll get caught up later, okay?
Best
All right.
best wishes, Heather.
Good luck.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Heather.
So let me see, Brian, I see Brian and Mike. Brian, would you like to share, or would you share from the middle school perspective?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in, Steve. Yeah, the learning gaps is something that the middle school group really felt strongly about. And we think that, regardless of what model we're going to go into, that's going to be an issue that we're going to have to address. And that's going to be probably further complicated by the possibility of moving back in between the different models. At the middle level, we think that a couple things are going to help us address that. The first one is the time that we have built into the school day for advisory. Our group thought we could use that advisory time to both assess learning gaps and provide the interventions for students. And again, at the middle level, the kids share a common core of 4 teachers. They all have the advisory time at the same time. So the flexibility for kids to move between teachers to receive the support that they need is an evident possibility. And we've actually started dabbling in that this school year. And I think with what we're faced with now, we can expand upon that to help support that. The other thing that we felt we could utilize is our extended day. All 4 of the middle schools have pretty solid targeted services programs that are usually, support different activities for kids to engage in. A lot of times they're not even school related, just fun activities for kids to do outside of the normal school day. We thought we could use that, both that time and that state funding, to assess some of that learning stuff and provide that support that we know that the kids are going to need with being gone for a whole trimester. So that's where our group really focused energy on the learning gaps. The social and emotional learning stuff, that's bigger, and again, that's going to be ongoing throughout the year too. I think we got to start with just teaching kids how to do school again. Middle school kids are pretty impulsive by nature, and they benefit from structure and routines, and they haven't been in school since the middle of March. So we're going to have to reteach some of the school aspects, reteach some of the ways we do business, and then also the new ways that we do business. We anticipate if we go back into an in-person model, there's going to be significant adjustments made to the routines inside of the building, the safety and sanitation guidelines based on what the CDC and the state gives us. And we're going to have to do that for them. We also know that with COVID, there's a lot of families that have experienced some type of trauma associated with that. I know at Osseo Middle School, I can say that we lost 1 staff member and at least 1 parent due to COVID related illnesses, and that's going to have some type of impact for our students that we're going to need to address at some level. And then, of course, with the death of George Floyd, this is an unprecedented time in U.S. history, and we know that there's a strong social justice movement that is taking place across our country, and we want to be able to work with our kids to be able to express themselves in a productive manner, but also just have that space for them to voice their thoughts and feelings regarding that. So that's kind of a sum up of the middle school discussions regarding that in-person model.
Thank you, Bart. Becker, Bart, would you like to share?
Yeah, you bet. So yes to everything that Rob and Brian said. A lot of it applies directly to the high school. I would just emphasize that at the high school level, it's going to be over 5 months, 5.5 months, if we are given the green light for September, in which our students have been in a school setting. 5.5 months. So it is going to be paramount, as was said before, that we get on those relationships. Our kids, speaking at the high school level, it's true pre-K through 12, but at the high school level, our kids need to know that they are loved as they are, for whom they are. And we have a tremendous opportunity before us to truly live out our mission and work to achieve equitable results, which again, in Osseo, it's high achievement for all students. It's an accelerated growth for our underperforming individual students or student groups. And in the end, it's closing of the achievement gap. And this is a unique opportunity to walk the walk. And at the high school level, it begins with establishing those positive relationships and then also focusing on the well-being of our kids for many of the reasons in which Brian shared above. Our high school age kids, and we got an election coming up. We have an event right here with the killing of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police, that they are in a very action-oriented manner. So we have opportunity to embed those learning experiences in person in the course of the high school day. But then, as was also shared, the learning gaps and the learnings and the skills and the content that was not achieved last spring, we have to maximize our opportunities during the school day in order to address those and provide the support which is needed. It looks differently in each of the high schools and the ALC. Speaking of Maple Grove Senior High School, we have an intervention hour. We call it Crimson Hour. I know Osseo has their opportunity hour. Park Center has a homework center. And so it looks differently, but we really discussed utilizing our existing assets after identifying where the gaps exist, then to provide the support needed with the relationships and the expertise of our teaching staff, licensed and non-licensed, to support our kids. It's going to require a far more intentional review and embedding of our trimester 3 essential learnings into the beginning of the instruction at the start of trimester 1. It's something that's always done, but it is going to have to be far more intentional. And the best opportunity obviously comes in the in-person model, where we have that face-to-face presence and experience with our kids.
Thank you, Bart. Next slide, please. So as part of the planning process for our team, the Instructional Core Work Group, we tackled the hybrid scenarios second, as it's likely the most challenging due to scheduling and transportation. And as part of that modeling, each of the teams, each of the groups developed a plan to address both 20% and 50% attending. 50% is the maximum under the MDE and MDH guidelines. So what we're sharing with you this evening is the 50% model. So as Corey mentioned, we're landing very similar to what the other districts are in terms of an A-B schedule. And that essentially means the 5 days of learning, 2 in-person days, 3 distance learning days. Schools will be collaborating with transportation to assign students to the 2 groups under this model. And so the A group would attend essentially Monday, Wednesday. B group would attend Tuesday, Thursday. And on Friday, we're anticipating as a key feature some additional time for staff to plan, collaborate, and potentially create some of that digital content. So this is a learning day for students, so students will engage in hybrid learning experiences, project-based learning, flipped lessons, different aspects that have surfaced up in the conversations of the various teams. That also presents time for that cleaning, meal, and materials delivery. And so as you see here, we're using asynchronous and synchronous, asynchronous being really sort of that flipped aspect to instruction, but also more some synchronous live components. And so as that's been mapped out in this framework, in-person independent work, this would include online instruction check-ins, some interventions and extensions. And the expectation is that staff would be accessible, 5 days a week for support. And you can see for music and Phi-Ed scheduling and instructional delivery would of course need to adhere to those guidelines. And so as part of that, again, let me invite Rob and Brian and Bart to share some of their group's thoughts on the perspectives as they plan the hybrid model, especially as it relates to this project-based learning or the flipped instruction, which surfaced up pretty strong. Who'd like to start?
I'll just add, I think Steve did a good job of summarizing most of what we were looking at. But what I would say is that we will, again, try to create tight alignment. We talked a lot about a need for pacing guides and recommendations. And what we really talked about is how is it that we're going to make sure that there's a strong flow and a predictability for students that doesn't diminish the instruction that they're receiving. And in order to do that, we really need to delineate out the work. And so that's where we really began to the hybrid and the distance learning model. We began to talk about now who and when will flipped model or flipped content be created. Will that be done in a combination of learning and achievement and certain teachers at different buildings? What constitutes it? Should a flip content or a flip lesson be introduction to an idea or a concept, or should it support and be tutorial based? And so, or both. And so we really focused heavily on that. The only other thing that I would want to add is, again, it's really important in any model that we choose is the concept of a parent academy where they really get access to the technology. It's in their hands. We review expectations and how those expectations remain the same no matter the model, and how they're nuanced depending on the model. So that's where our work centered on. We also explored and would like to continue to explore ways that we can increase support for students, whether it be in person or online, categorically, whether it be for, let's say, newcomers to the country, our site-based programs, things like that. So we're continuing to explore what that looks like in a hybrid model at the elementary level.
All right, I'll go ahead and jump in from the middle school level. Our group, and it's what Corey and Steve both said, this was the most challenging model of all three of them, partly because we've never done this model before, but then also because we're having teachers teaching kids both in person and distance at the same time. And that's going to create some challenges for us. Our group felt really strong that we needed to have the A-B schedule where the students are in the building 50% of the time. We feel the more time the kids have face-to-face with the teachers, the better off the learning experience is going to be, and the better off we're going to be able to kind of start backfilling that learning from the 1920 school year. We also thought that in the hybrid model, there could be a possibility for targeted groups of kids to attend school more regularly. And just off the top of our head, we were thinking about some of our special education students and our EL students that kind of smaller groups naturally anyway. Their class sizes are smaller. And historically, some of the students that are underperforming what their peers are. So we thought that could be a natural intervention to help support some of those learning gaps. The other thing that we thought that would be really essential in this is some type of flipped instruction or video instruction that would support the non-attendance days for students. And when I say non-attendance, I'm talking about attendance being in person, but that there has to be something that's going to engage those kids at a high level when they're not actually inside of the building. So we thought the flip model of instruction would be the best way to do that. And then for both the distance and the hybrid model, in both of those, we thought that it would be really important for teachers to focus on the most essential standards for kids and what's going to be the most productive use of their time that would build on for students and subsequent learning that is going to take place, and possible use of project-based learning or something that would allow kids to demonstrate proficiency in a non-traditional way. That's a summary of what the middle level talked about with the hybrid model.
And at the high school level, very much the same, emphasize again what both Rob and Brian shared. We really called out from the language of MDE that a hybrid learning, acknowledging this is by far the most complex and it will require the best of every staff member in our school, licensed and non-licensed, to service our students and our families. But we kept it front and center that the learning of students, the pace of learning must be maintained, because in the end, we have to be able to graduate our students with fidelity. And therefore, the onus is on us in this hybrid model, one that we've never done, that we have to create teaching and learning experiences in which is going to engage our kids, but also maintain the pace of learning unit after unit, trimester after trimester. We also kept front and center that whether a student is in person, if they're an 8A student, or if they're at home and engaged in distance learning through a flipped model or a digital project-based model, the learnings have to reinforce, complement, and elaborate on one another based on being in person and also online. They can't be two separate two separate types of learning. They have to be fully aligned with one another. And again, that's going to require our best. We have to maximize the opportunities for teaching teams to collaborate with one another, to share of best practices, to create learning experiences in which our students can see their own lived racial experiences in those learning opportunities. The best opportunities, of course, are in English and social studies for that, but elsewhere. So when kids are engaged, whether it's in person or at home, in these project-based learning opportunities, they can see themselves and they can naturally engage with and relate and find that the learning is relevant to them. Again, in the end, so that the pace of learning is authentic and that it continues as normal. And again, in this, it only highlights the need for the establishment of positive relationships right off the bat. And then as Brian shared, we also kept, and I think it was Rob, both of you, we are still working on prioritizing our highest need students, whether it's students who receive level 2 and level 3 in special education services, or students who are multilingual learners and receive EL services. We need to service our students who from trimester 3 have a host of no grades, and especially in those classes which are required for graduation. So all of those items are still on the docket, and there's still much more work to be done in this hybrid model.
Thank you, Bart. Next slide, please. So finally, with the distance learning, this was the last one we tackled, in part because we spent some time immersed in it in the spring. But hopefully you'll see some of the feedback Corey talked about finding its way into sort of the planning that the teams encountered. And so, for instance, daily schedules are expectations, or a more predictable learning experience with clearer guidelines and for engagement. So these daily schedules clearly articulated, that full access to grade level and subject content. And we've talked at length already about the various different approaches, but also the notion that students will be provided with materials on a regularly scheduled basis. And then, of course, staff would need to have access to the building, but of course within MDH guidelines. So I'm going to, if there's anything else that the principals would like to add to the distance learning.
Steve, I think that's a good summary. We really focused on what would make this enhanced, or how could we, first and foremost, was applying the experiences of our families and our staff to build this distance learning experience. So the only thing I would add is it's imperative for staff to have that regular time to plan and create. The only way for digital or flipped content materials to be out there, to be produced, is that staff have the time and the coordinated effort to do so. So that was of key importance to our group.
Brian, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, not a ton on this one, on Steve. You know, our group really focused on, you know, what we did during distance learning and what we could do better with that. We talked about the need for engagement as well as the need for enrichment, and that's the challenge. We have, you know, kids that we're really struggling to connect with, and we have kids that they can do more. They need to do more. We have to challenge them. And we thought, and this is both with the distance learning and with the hybrid, that we could better utilize our ESPs during these models and provide some virtual help rooms or enrichment rooms for kids to access and kind of capitalize on the skills of our non-licensed teaching staff as well. And we think that's really, really important. We want that to be something that is strongly considered as we move forward to this. And then another thing that we thought of that would be beneficial for both the students and the families was to try to streamline some of our communication. And I know some of the teams at our school did that with some pretty positive feedback, where kids were able to go into one location and find out what they were supposed to do that day for math, science, social studies, and English. And it also provided a place for parents and families to access that information. So they weren't going into multiple places every day. And for a lot of our families, parents have multiple kids in multiple schools across the system, and trying to access that. As a parent with 4 kids, I know I was grateful that they're all grown and I didn't have to go through that experience, because I can see how it would be overwhelming for them to try to do school differently and to stay on top of that stuff. Because, you know, the kids, you know, you ask them what they're doing and they're going to say, oh, I don't have anything to do. I'm done. So an easy way to help support the parents in this, if we have to go into this model.
Yep, just a quick reinforcement of what was both by Rob and Brian. It was highlighted that we need to, in this distance learning model, focus on the critical learning standards and make them as relevant and engaging and differentiated as possible, because we have lost in the distance learning model, while there's still opportunities, we have lost perhaps our most powerful asset, which is that face-to-face in-person relationship. That if a student's coming in from a rough experience at school, at home, apart from that classroom, and they're not quite ready to do school, we don't have that ability to kneel down next to them and say, hey, it's good to see you here. How can I help? So the focusing on the key essential learning standards, and then teaming and utilizing the opportunities we have within our structures to support teachers team together, utilize and leverage the strengths of each other to build the most rigorous and differentiated and scaffolded digital learning lessons and learning experiences for our kids. Applying our learnings from Tri-3 and just enhancing, elevating, leveling up in everything we do.
And thank you. And let me just take this moment to thank our 3 principals, Rob Nelson, Brian Chance, and Bart Becker. I can't begin to describe how we appreciate your facilitating these groups and your time that you've devoted to this and will devote. Sorry, guys. But thank you so much for everything that you've done in terms of representing your groups and bringing their voices forward. And I'd also like to just assure that, you know, to the board that over the last 6 weeks, as Corey mentioned, we've been working with operations and resource facilitators, Laurel Anderson and Ron Meyer. And I want to personally thank them because not only were we meeting with them during the planning, we're now in that process of beginning to operationalize these things because of the time frame. So I want to thank them for their expertise and their willingness to work with us. That's at this point, I believe I'll be turning this over to Ron Meyer, and I want to thank the board for your attention and your willingness to listen to us.
Okay, thank you, Steve, and good evening, Chair Ostapi, Superintendent McIntyre, and school board members. The operations work group was tasked with developing plans for each scenario to support the teaching and learning that you just heard about, whether that be in the buildings or whether it be remotely. Go ahead and go on to the next slide, please, Anthony. So for the sake of time, we're going to just briefly go through the operational plan. And while our remarks tonight are going to be brief, it certainly is not an indication of the amount of work that has went into the operational plan over not just the last 4 weeks of our work group, but really over the last several months, as each of our operational teams have started to work with their individual teams to formulate their plan. As part of our work group process, we categorize operations into 6 different areas, including health and safety and risk management, our facilities and custodial, our transportation, our nutrition services, childcare, which Corey talked about earlier, and then our technology department. And again, this team worked really well over the last 4 weeks to develop this plan. Go ahead and move forward, Anthony, if you would. Just a few highlights. The work group consisted of 16 different people representing various departments, including our operations departments, including our teacher group, our principal group, community education, as well as members from our teaching and learning department. We actually had 9 total meetings over 4 weeks at the end of June and into July. And even outside of those 9 meetings, we had extensive work that was happening, whether it be our individual operational teams or our work group team members that was reviewing our Department of Health and Department of Education guidance, as well as best practices as it related to operations in schools as they're looking at planning and bringing students potentially back into the building. As we ended our work and put together our plan, we have already started to operationalize some of the elements of our plan in particular, because as you will hear in just a moment, parts of our operational plan include things like personal protective equipment, sanitizing and cleaning products, barriers like plexiglass or other materials to put into high traffic areas and different places in our schools. And we know that schools across the state as well as across the country, multiple businesses are also seeking to acquire some of those elements. And so we have already started to really look at what do we need as part of our plan in each of the scenarios, and making sure that we're working with our purchasing department to have access to those items and make sure that they're here on time for the start of school. So I'm going to turn it over actually to each. We had 6 leaders for each of those operation areas that I talked about. I'm going to ask them to briefly talk about some key elements. Keep in mind, these are very brief highlights from the work and from the plan. We have over 50 pages of work that our group put together as a result of the planning that we did that will really drive as we move forward. But we're going to just briefly go over some of the highlights. So with that, I'm going to ask Dave Mordock to walk us through our health and safety and risk management key features to our operational plan. Dave?
Thank you, Ron. We will strongly encourage but not require face coverings for staff and students. There's a lot of discussion at the state level on face coverings, and we will continue to monitor MDH guidance and adjust as necessary. Health screenings will be conducted for all staff, students, and visitors entering our schools, but temperature screenings will only be done in the distance learning scenario at the emergency child care centers. There will be signage at the main entrance of each school listing COVID symptom information, as well as social distancing visual cues in key areas. We will restrict non-essential visitors, volunteers, as well as outside groups from entering our schools.
We will provide clear barriers in the main office of all schools at the point of first contact with essential visitors. Last, we will train all staff prior to the start of the school year on COVID awareness and cleaning chemical usage. I'll now turn it over to Jeff to discuss food and nutrition services.
Hi, good evening. For nutrition services, we focused on 5 areas while taking into account the 3 scenarios. Those 5 areas that we focused on were service model, menu, safety and sanitation, resources needed, and staffing. So first, in reference to the service model, meals will not be consumed, and we will use cafeteria spaces as well as other common spaces for meal consumption, and we'll do that to help ensure social distancing. So due to concerns with student supervision and cleaning, meals will not be consumed in classrooms. So we'll use those other spaces, cafeteria and common areas. We'll limit the use of high-touch areas such as key pin pads where students would normally enter their pin numbers, and also tray slides. We're going to eliminate self-service of all non-packaged items. So the staff behind the line will plate all items for the students. And nutrition staff will follow guidelines provided by the Minnesota Department of Health for food service establishments. And this difference there's a little difference here in what was said with health and safety previously. So for food service staff, face coverings are required. So we'll require that for our staff, as well as health screenings as well prior to the shifts. Meals will be offered to students in buildings, as well as those in distance learning scenarios. And we're going to provide a 3-week cycle menu and ensure a variety of hot and cold menu options as well. So that's a brief overview of food service key features.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm now going to turn it over to Dale Carlstrom, who's going to walk us through some of the key features for our facilities and our custodial plan. Dale?
Thank you. The facilities operations team will have 3 main areas of responsibility: cleaning and disinfecting, facility modifications, and mechanical systems management. In the cleaning and disinfecting area, our team will coordinate cleaning protocols with all staff. We'll facilitate training and right-to-know information for staff who are assisting in the cleaning and disinfecting. We'll monitor and maintain the cleaning standards to ensure we are meeting or exceeding the recommendations and requirements for the MDH. We'll establish a COVID response team for each facility. Under the facilities modifications, cafeteria expansion will be our responsibility, and we'll try to find common spaces that we can retrofit to accommodate the cafeteria needs. We'll repurpose spaces to accommodate social distancing and isolation. We'll install barriers at the first point of contact. We'll limit high contact touch points, and we'll install directional and instructional signage. Under the mechanical systems management, we'll increase equipment run times before and after school. We'll increase outside air volumes, and we'll comply with all the MDH requirements for equipment management in the event of a COVID exposure. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dale. And now I'm going to invite Carrie Cabe, who's going to walk us through our child care key features.
Good evening. So to start the childcare plan, just keeping in mind that childcare models will be prepared and maximized for all 3 scenarios. We will work with building administrators to determine any space needs once we would know more around what model we are in and what enrollments we would have based on the program that would be provided at that time. The hybrid model presents the biggest challenge for us around staffing and just thinking through space within buildings and those different kind of things. So that one holds the most logistical challenges for our team. Financial support would also be needed to ensure equitable access, right? So keeping in mind, we want to be able to serve our families equitably across our system. So potentially seeking out scholarship funds, as well as implementing a sliding scale fee for the hybrid and distance learning models. Within the hybrid model, for instance, having potential need for care before and after, as well on a day that they're not in school. So wanting to think all through those different options where kids potentially would be and where families would need support. Priority would be given to essential workers. That's part of the guidance that we were given, but our goal would be to serve our whole community based on space needs, again, working with administration at each of the sites. A huge amount of collaboration with multiple departments within the operations team, with instructional team listed there as well, especially building staff where the programs would be held. And then lastly, high levels of staff training and high levels of staff support. We've had the opportunity to learn a ton providing childcare since last March. So being able to utilize a lot of that, but continue to support our staff as things ebb and flow within the program.
All right, thank you, Carrie. And now we'll move on to transportation. Troy Schreifels is going to walk us through the key features. As you heard earlier in our instructional group, this is a significant challenge as we look at the operational plan. So Troy, can you walk us through some of the key features, please?
Good evening. Yes, I can do that, Ron. The transportation team is very busy preparing all three scenarios. The hybrid model presents the biggest challenge for the transportation team as it relates to capacity. We are preparing routing scenarios to both support a 50% capacity and a 20% capacity because MDE and MDH have not been clear yet on how many students we can put on a bus for a hybrid model. We're continuing to press both organizations around this issue and hope to have more information next week. We'll be performing a family survey at the high school level for the first time ever. And the purpose for that is to consider students that are eligible for transportation and ask them to reserve a seat in order to maintain capacity on buses. This will help support the capacity challenges we face this year. We will also be working on a staggered arrival and dismissal practice, if feasible, to minimize large congregations at the entrances and exits during arrival and departure. We will also need to discontinue activities that bring large groups together, such as field trips. Our school bus vendors will also maintain a comprehensive vehicle cleaning protocol to keep our vehicles sanitized and ready for daily transportation.
Thank you, Troy. And last but not least, I'm going to ask Anthony Paternos to walk us through the technology plan and some of the key features to that plan. Anthony?
Good evening. Technology is an essential resource that provides the foundation of our organization to operate. Our fall reopening technology plan is designed and organized to allow our system to be nimble and agile in order to move between models as needed without a significant transition process. The plan focuses on 3 areas that support staff, students, and families. These include technology support, technology resources, and technology/resource distribution. In order to meet the safety recommendations from CDC, the Minnesota Health Department, and MDE, and to limit shared student resources, and to ensure our ability to move between models if needed, we will be implementing a 1-to-1 student-to-device ratio K through 12. In order to execute this, we will need to purchase an additional 550 iPads to have current functional equipment in the hands of students and staff. As part of our plan, we will continue to provide internet support and resources to families in each model as necessary. Full technology service and support will continue in all models through a low to no touch process.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. So as you heard over and over in our plan, the hybrid model is the most challenging of the 3 different scenarios from an operational standpoint. At the same time, we do have a solid operational plan to ensure that we can safely support our students and our staff in each of the 3 scenarios. So with that, I will turn it over to Laurel Anderson to walk us through the resources work group plan.
Thank you, Ron, and good evening. I had the pleasure to serve as the facilitator of the resources work group. And I want to begin by thanking each of the team members for the tremendous amount of work and focus that they continue to dedicate to our work in this area. Tonight, we're going to give a brief overview given by our 3 directors who led various subcommittees, Kelly Benusa, Kathy Island-Madison, and Joel Miltier. I'm going to first turn it over to Kelly Benusa to share information regarding our process.
Thank you, Laurel. The resource group included 12 members from various labor union leaders and district administration. We appreciate the diverse perspectives that were brought forward to make the best decisions for our students and our staff. We began meeting as a large group in June and also created subcommittees which focused on the following areas. Identified both financial and human resources needed to support all three scenarios of learning for the fall of 2020, reviewed MDH and MDE guidance, developed a budget process and created a template for making budget requests and for allocating CARES funding based on those requests. We created a staffing survey for employees and identified labor agreements and work expectations that may need to be modified. Now I'll turn over the presentation to Kathy Island Madison to talk about the highlights.
Thank you, Kelly. Good evening. In collaboration with labor management and site leaders, our team did a tremendous amount of work as it relates to resource planning, and I'd like to share with you highlights at a very high level. Our first highlight is the development of a fund request template that team facilitators can use to request funds via programs such as CARES, the LTFM program, and other funding resources. Having this template will provide the district with a standardized method of capturing expenses related to the COVID-19. Additionally, we created an employee survey specifically targeted to district staffing. The survey was designed with targeted questions so we could better understand our employees' thoughts and concerns surrounding returning to work in the 3 learning models. The data from the survey will be beneficial to assist our staffing with assignments for the upcoming school year. We also worked with labor management and site leaders to identify and design 10 key work expectation categories for all staff. This was done in an effort to develop consistent work expectations for employee groups and maximize flexibility across all job titles. As we recognized there would be a potential need to navigate between different learning models, we had collaborative discussions with labor management and site leaders on the concept of flexibility within the bargaining units. And finally, we captured the overall staffing impact in all of our bargaining groups within the 3 learning models and created what-if scenarios to assist with preparation for staffing needs for the upcoming school year. And with that, I'll turn it over to Joe Miltier to share the team's key features.
Thanks, Kathy, and good evening. As we review the plans and recommendations from the other work groups, we're focusing our resources and recommending a net zero cost impact to the general fund budget to ensure sustainability of our programming for students. We have created a task force inclusive of our labor leaders and management staff to clearly identify areas of employment where we need specific work agreements to support learning for the 2021 school year. Through our staff survey mentioned earlier, we will develop processes and plans to support employees as they return to work. And finally, we will build our substitute pool available for student learning through increased marketing and creative sourcing of available staff to assist in supporting daily absences. I'd like to now turn it over to the Communications and Stakeholder Engagement Work Group.
Board members, in terms of our process, I will highlight, and if you would advance, Anthony, I'll highlight that our team included perspectives from multiple staff groups and departments, and we recognize that our work is primarily in service of others, meaning we will communicate the work of other work groups, particularly focusing on instruction and operations, which we believe are of the highest interest to our families. We do have an outstanding team of volunteers, and we will be continuing our work through the coming weeks. Advance, please. It's important to note that we started out by clarifying our public participation goals based on the IAP2 spectrum of public participation. We recognize that given the planning timeframe, which is very short, and the pandemic circumstances, which are very limiting, it was only realistic for us to have the 2 goals of inform and consult. Informing is about providing the public with balanced information to assist them in understanding the problem and solutions. And consulting work is around obtaining input and feedback on stakeholder experiences with distance learning and their interests for the coming school year. We reviewed the data we already have in hand, including previous stakeholder surveys and communication tools available. We identified opportunities to seek input, including the fall planning survey conducted by our Learning and Achievement Department, the employee survey conducted by HR, and a new tool called Thought Exchange, which is an idea crowdsourcing tool that helps organizations understand what stakeholders agree is most important. We promoted Thought Exchange in multiple ways, and while the participation was relatively low considering the size of our district, it's not surprising because it's a new tool and we were doing the Thought Exchange at the same time that the fall planning survey was in the field. What we learned confirms what we're hearing elsewhere, and that is that safety, rigorous and engaging instruction, mental health support, and clear, transparent information so that families can make informed choices are all important to our stakeholders. We also reviewed many fall planning communications from districts around the country. Advance, please. We now intend to proceed with creating 2 types of communications that will be available in multiple languages. First, a short summary, as simple and as visual as possible, geared to all, and that would focus on the big ideas about each model. And then a more detailed version for those who want to dig deeper into the plans. And as we always do, we'll use multiple channels to distribute that information. We heard from our team that distributing information to families through school leaders is more effective than sending from the district level. And we know that it's important to reflect back what we heard from stakeholders, what they told us through surveys and the Thought Exchange in terms of what is important to them. And that concludes the report from our work group.
Okay, board members, I think that's the end of our presentation. And as you can tell, the instructional core and our operations team clearly had the most comprehensive ground to cover, and they got the bulk of the time tonight. And I know there's questions either you have right now or that you'd like some follow-up on. So Chair Osseo, I'll turn it back to you for that. But I just want to say thank you to our team. As Ron said, I think if you added it all together, our document's nearly 100 pages. And so how to drill that down into this presentation was a bit challenging. And I want to commend our team for giving you the high level key features and highlights of our work. So thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent McIntyre, and thank you to everybody who presented. This was a very well thought out and comprehensive plan. There are many, many details, and we can go through and ask some of the questions on these. I think it's going to take a while for some of us to process this. So if we can start, let me start with Director Mosqueda Jones with any questions or comments. Jackie.
Thank you so much for all your work. I've talked to a few people and you have dedicated so much time and energy and have thought through so many details. I can't even understand all the details that you probably have to think about in what you're doing. So I just want you to know that I truly appreciate all your work. I do have several questions, but I think I'm not going to take up the whole night to ask them. One of the things I just want to reiterate is I heard a couple times from the principals about engaging parents in like a parent academy, things like that. And I just want to hear from the different groups how we're going to make sure that we reach all the parents that we need to reach. How are we going to get translations available to families that need translations? And how are we going to train families? I'm a big proponent of having one platform that all families can go to, like Seesaw. How are we going to train families on those? Or do we have a plan for that? That's my first question. Don't all jump at once.
Would any of our principals like to speak to that, have some thoughts on it? I'll just say this is definitely, Jackie, something that we're going to be working on and working with the principals as we unfold it, and certainly connecting with Michael Lehan and Brian on as well. But I'm wondering if some of the principals may have a couple of thoughts about that.
Yeah, Steve, I'll jump in from the middle level. We we did focus on the streamlined communication and making sure that it was not only available in all languages for families, so that they could quickly and easily understand what was expected of them, but trying to streamline that because, and I know in the presentation I talked about students that, or families that had multiple students inside of the school district, but a big part of our conversation was that we also had families that were the parents didn't necessarily speak English as their first language, and the challenges that presented. So we did talk about making sure that we were providing that communication in multiple languages and in multiple venues as well. And of course, that comes with the balance of over communicating and things, but we wanted to make sure we had that on our school websites, through Schoology, through the Connect, not Connect Ed, it's School Messenger now that they call it, through mailing distribution. So as many ways as we could, so that parents knew exactly how to access the parents knew how to access what was expected of the kids, and the kids knew where to go to access what was expected of them.
Sure. And then related to that question is, are we planning on having things available to teachers to send out to families? I'm just thinking I had a family that didn't read in any language and didn't speak English at all. And so she needed videos in Spanish is what she needed. And so I'm wondering if we're taking some thoughts on how to make certain like instructional videos on how to use a certain platform that we're going to use to help with the students and the parents. Those kinds of things that we're thinking about having. I'm just concerned because I know during distance learning, our translators were super overwhelmed because teachers were trying to use them and Barb needed to use them to get all the information out, and I'm just trying to figure out how we're going to utilize translation services in the most efficient and cost-effective way. Does it make sense to hire a few for the year because it might be cheaper than contracting out all the time, or those kinds of things?
Hey, Jackie, I can jump in quickly on the intersectionality with technology. So we have had that conversation to a certain degree around what are the uniform standard platforms that are core to the essential delivery of instruction in any one of the models. So for instance, at elementary, having pre-K through 5 in Seesaw, having 6 through 12 in Schoology, having Google Apps for Education as part of that core instructional suite, and then creating the communications and the tutorials with families in multiple languages and providing some of the video opportunities with that. Some of that work did start last spring in distance learning, working with Kirsten Nicholson and with the translators. We just need to build that out as we move into the fall. And part of that is working with the task force I have going right now around just defining what are those core essential tools that every student's going to engage with at specific levels, so we can create those layers of support, whether it's to teachers for the PD and support side or the families on how to utilize and engage those tools as well.
Do I know Seesaw translates for families. Do the other ones translate automatically for families or not?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
And the only other thing I would add to that is, without knowing quite yet what the model will be, we've had preliminary conversations with Laurel Anderson and her team, with Jeremy Willie and his team about how to combine concepts of meet the teacher, open house / parent information nights. So I think depending on the model, it also will dictate the timeline needed in order to accomplish it.
Sure, certainly. That leads me to my question to you, Anthony. I'm assuming since you said we have to buy 550 iPads, that's already somewhere in the budget that you can use. You're not asking for extra money for that.
Nope, and we're operating within the parameters as outlined by the resource team, so not going out of the constraints of the existing funding sources, whether it be CARES dollars or existing budget capacity. Just some quick background on the 550 request. We are at a place where we had to decommission 9,100 iPads because they're of the first generation and will no longer work. But because of our transition at 4th and 5th grade, that's going to free up some resources to get us to our what we need at the K through 2 ratio. The particular 550 iPads is to complete the 1-to-1 ratio at 3rd grade because our recommendation was originally a 2-to-1 ratio. So those additional 550 would get us to where we need to complete the full transition.
Is there any other technology needs that you think that won't, that the budget won't cover, that you think we're going to need for moving in and out of these 3 scenarios?
At this time, we don't anticipate any additional. Looking at our resources and our structures, we think we can manage within the capacity that we currently have. Again, as we move through, we might discover something, but we're really being conscious of what are the resources that we have and how can we effectively operate with what we have. And we feel at this point we can accomplish what we need.
If I could, I will jump in as well. Jackie, we are having continued conversation because there's also some CARE dollars both at the city and at the county level. And we've had some initial conversations, at least at the city levels, through Brooklyn Bridge Alliance, and looking at in particular, some of the internet needs and technology needs as well. So there might even be some additional dollars that we're still looking at. And lobbying for, I guess you'd say, with some of those other organizations and government entities that do have some CARE dollars that might be available to us.
The other question, Anthony, that I have for you is, I know tech support was really difficult for me for families that don't speak English. Do you have access to, do any of your tech people speak another language, or is that something that we could capitalize on some high school students to earn an extra credit or something to help do tech support for families that speak other languages?
Yeah, the language barrier is something we've had conversations regarding pre-COVID because we don't have a lot of language options within our team at the moment, and understand that, there are those needs there, and trying to determine how do we create a more accessible pathway for families. Some of the things that, my team learned a lot this year as we're providing tech support is just to engage in some of the resources that we have, like Language Line. So utilizing Language Line to triage that translation with our tech support staff. So there are some things that towards the end of the spring, we started to get in place and get a team educated to provide better language supports around services. We've also looked at a variety of different types of service models. So for the most part, we operated centrally out of the ESC, and parents and students made appointments to come in. We're looking and exploring at what does potential, I'm not going to call it Geek Squad per se, but a mobile transportation unit that if we need to go out to a student's home and exchange a device to make sure that we can quickly swap out what they need, what does that look like within our capacity, and utilizing district vans and van drivers as well.
Okay. Thank you, Anthony. Jackie, if you have any more questions, please yield for a little bit. Let's move on, and we'll get to a second round or third round. Director Dawson Walton, if you could, any questions you have or comments?
Yeah, first, just this is a really thoughtful approach to what we're kind of facing as, the big question, right? That everybody's wanting to know what's going to happen in the fall. And, I know everybody's really pulled. I know all of you in many directions, with parents and students and teachers, staff. And so, so thank you for the thoughtfulness of this. I do have, of course, as anybody, a lot of people have many questions, but one of just the basic questions I wanted to know is, in a couple of the presentations, masks were brought up, whether or not you wear them or not, they're mandatory or not. And given that we know a lot of jurisdictions, whether it's the state or potentially local jurisdictions, are making decisions based on that, and I think the governor is going to make one shortly, whether or not there's a statewide mask mandate. How does that impact our schools? So do you know if there is a, let's say, either the state mandate, a county mandate, or even a city mandate, how would that impact in the schools?
Yeah, that's a great question. We had a lot of conversation within our operation work group as it related to masks. And right now, as the Department of Health guidance and MDE, they're strongly recommending it, but not necessarily requiring it. And so we brought that into our plan as of now, but also understanding and knowing that cities are across the states are kind of taking their own initiative with some of those requirements, as well as it's possible that the governor could as well. We will continue to monitor that. I think some of the things that we'll have to work through, depending on if there is a mandate either in one of our cities or Hennepin County or at the state level, and where is that cutoff? Because a lot of the mandates that we've seen are a certain age group and over. And there's another age group that doesn't require it. So we'll have to work through to understand what is that cutoff if there is a mandate, and how does that work within our schools, and understanding how are we going to require that and try to get compliance with our students depending on where that cutoff is. So we're watching that very closely. We had conversations that if one of our cities were to create a mandate, we would likely then have it as a requirement across the district, because it would be too difficult to be able to have it required in one part of the district and just recommended in another part. So that's, as Dave had said in his slide, while that is part of our plan right now for strong recommendation based on the Department of Health guidelines right now, we are closely monitoring that for any changes.
Okay, thank you. My next question is, and maybe I missed this, but related to masks for our teachers or ESPs or food service workers or custodial staff, will the district provide masks, or excuse me, PPE in general, I should say?
Yep. So that's a great question. That's part of our process that we're going through as we're operationalizing the plan now, is that we are providing some masks for each of our staff members, again, because we are highly encouraging them to use them. So we want to make sure that we provide some of those for each of our staff members, the reusable masks. We'll also have disposable masks that we'll acquire as well for anyone that maybe forgets their mask and still wants one, as well as things like face shields, gloves, things like that for some of those other PPE. So that's what we're looking at right now in terms of what do we need, and making sure that we are able to source those in time for school to start and to get those out to our staff.
Okay, and one more thing, not to belabor the point, but it's like literally the most controversial issue, I feel like. If there is a mandate, does that mean then, would that trigger then providing masks? Like if a mandate was to happen at whatever level that impacts our school, and then along with that, one more question is, can we tap into CARES funding to purchase masks?
Yeah, so the CARES funding, the bulk of the CARES funding does give us flexibility to use for PPE. So we could use some of that funding for PPE like masks. Again, we're already in the process of acquiring masks for every single one of our staff members. So we will be able to give those to our staff. As it relates to students, if they do create or give us a mandate that we do have to have everyone use masks, we will have to have some further conversation on what does that look like. Do we provide one to every single student, or multiple ones to every single student, or do we just have some available for those students that come and don't have one? We'll have some further conversation about that.
Okay. I'll ask two more questions on here. Okay. We'll not be done, but for my little round. So when we talk a lot about teachers and whatever the scenario is, will teachers, have sufficient time to, in addition to just like kind of normal schedule, to actually like plan before. I've seen, I've heard some people say like teachers go back like 2 weeks before, however long before, to really prepare and as as we were kind of uncertain around which one of the three options would be. And then is that paid? Would that be paid time, or is that? I mean, what is? Do you know anything about that? Have you thought about that, or?
So I don't know if this is a Laurel or Steve question. There are lots of conversations happening out there, Kelsey. I think you hit on something that everyone's wondering. Will we start on time? Will we be delayed? How much time is needed to prepare for whatever model they pick? And I think it does hinge on what model we're moving into to start. Will everyone have the same model across the state? These are all questions we're wondering about. So I think and I'll let Steve answer this. But I think go ahead, Steve. Sorry.
No, Corey, thank you. Yeah. Yes, I mean, that's been, and I'm sure the principals would probably attest to this as well. That's been a major conversation about finding what would planning look like under the scenarios. And I know in the groups, they modeled out some of the planning, and as we talked about in the hybrid, looking at that Friday as a time as well for planning. Is we know the planning has to happen, and it would typically be built in to that teacher into that teacher schedule. I don't know if Rob or Brian, you want to. I know that's you've mocked out some different things like that, but anything to add?
Well, I think it's a moving target, and I think the first thing we have to do is identify which model we're going to be in. And obviously the hybrid model is going to be the model that is going to require the most planning because we haven't done that one before. So if that's the model that we start in, and I can speak for Osseo Middle School with the staff that I've talked to, I know that they're going to begin planning as soon as we provide them with the word of what we're actually going to do. And then for myself as a principal, I would devote a substantial, if not all of the time during sustaining operations to get us up and running into the model to start the school year. And then in that hybrid model, there is that Friday that is kind of a collaboration flex. It's still an instructional day, but there's time built in for that with teacher collaboration and planning. And then I would use that to kind of troubleshoot as we go through it. And that's just based on my thoughts right now with it. If we would start late, or if there would become funding available for teachers to start early, we could adjust. But I don't know that that's possible with the time parameters that we have. So that's kind of my initial thoughts, Kelsey, on kind of where I'm at right now with thinking for the planning of the something different. And that's the hybrid model creates this most significant challenge with that.
Yeah, I just would think that, teachers need time. I think that's a lot to ask of them and to prepare. We talk about social emotional learning, and, Bart, you talked about that, that, when you don't have, you're uncertain around that personal interaction or really building those relationships. I would think that planning time is key. And I know we're waiting for direction from MDE. And so hopefully that will address some of those kind of standards around that. The last thing I wanted to ask about, and again, Bart, it's kind of something that you mentioned around just learning standards, and just being really essential, and having fidelity as we move into our programming. And so, one of the differences, and I'm a mom of 4, and at all different levels, and what was, I think, the most challenging, I would say, for me, a working mom, 4 kids, all different ages, is it was a little, and I don't mean, this is not in a negative way, I'm just my kind of learnings. It was hard because there were different kind of instructional plans, I guess I'd say. Some teachers would, had kind of a really planned out day, this is what you do, and we have a morning meeting, and full day. And then, others, and I'm talking to a lot of my other friends that have students same age, they're maybe in the same grade, and then they have something very different. And so thinking about, let's say we even do the hybrid or the distance learning model, will there be some instruction that is like almost like a template, so there's consistency at the different levels?
Thank you. And I'm with you. I had 4 kids at 3 different schools myself, and I was living that. And that was some of the feedback we shared with our staff this last spring, specifically about the organization of Schoology folders, about what was most understandable, accessible, as one example. So we did, and this I give credit to Rob. He had mapped out, and then we, Jill Kine, I want to credit her also, applied a template idea of what a structured weekly schedule could look like, where there is one day in a class strictly devoted to synchronous learning, one day that is strictly devoted to remote learning and application of those, and so on, one day for support and et cetera. We did discuss that, and so it is there. Going to the point about the essential standards, that is also in the veins of each teacher clearly communicating so that students understand what I'm learning and why it matters. So we can do our very best to eliminate that. Well, what'd you learn today? When it was actually not, it was good stuff. But do we have that clear connection of what we're learning, why we're learning it, and why it matters? So the answer, big picture answer, is yes, we did discuss that, because that was some of the feedback we heard and we lived as parents.
Thank you.
You're muted, Mike.
Yes, I am. Director Simons, do you have any questions or comments?
Well, Kelsey and Jackie asked some really great questions, and just appreciation for the amount of work that's gone into this. I can't imagine. A lot of people have asked me and other board members about what we're doing, and I'm like, you know what, this is in the hands of the experts, and they're really diving in, and we've been updated at times along the way, but we really trust our experts, and I trust all of you and appreciate the work that you've really done to plan for this. I appreciate the extra time that you wouldn't normally spend doing this. I appreciate the time that you have not taken off as you normally would to do this work. So I really just want to thank you for that wholeheartedly. And to me, this is just about having grace for one another. We know that this is just a challenging time. All of us as parents know that working with our kids to engage in this type of distance learning environment isn't the same. And I know there was a lot of discussion about the pace of learning to be maintained, and I just call for everybody to have grace for one another and doing this work. And it's not going to be perfect, and I know that you're going to be challenged. I know that it's not going to be satisfactory to everybody's expectations, and just know that we support you in that when all of that comes, because it will. And we're going to do the best we can and keep our eye on what's minimum. In my industry, we call it minimum viable. But I think this was kind of hit on, like, what's the most essential that we do. And that includes relationships with the kids. And let's just make sure that we've got appropriate expectations and have that grace for one another. So I'm not going to ask any more questions. There's volumes of questions and details that you're all working through. I just appreciate your effort in that, and you have my support fully.
All right, thank you, Director Simons. I mean, unfortunately, when you look today, the biggest or the quickest way to get into a fight is to talk about mask, no mask, and level of risk. And right now, there's experts all around it. There's pundits and there's people that know nothing that are always talking about it. So we have to be very careful. And I agree with Director Simons when we have to talk about grace and talk about respecting others in that form. I believe that everybody here wants to do what is best for our children, our parents, and our teachers in as safest way as possible. To forego the mental health challenges that are being brought on, and that mitigate the educational issues that are being brought on by some of this. So when it comes to questions, I think I'm going to punt, just like Director Simons. There are very many, and I can reach out to everybody. But I truly believe that this group has done a tremendous job in thinking through all of the issues in your, you have a 100-page checklist, you probably missed several. And we will learn from that, but we have to respect that we've gone through a lot of effort, a lot of hard work, and I do appreciate that. Unfortunately, we are in a waiting mode right now. We've done a lot of work to plan, but right now we're still waiting. We would love to have that extra 7 days, but when it comes, and when the decision comes, I'm confident that we'll be ready to go and to take the action that is necessary. So thank you all for doing it, and Corey, thank you very much for helping to lead that effort.
Can I just say one thing? I really do appreciate also the surveys, and then just really reaching out to your own staff and ensuring that voices are heard. And I just would just ask that we just continue that, I think throughout this at many points, just to keep doing check-ins. And so I know that, all of you are very committed to that, and it's shown so much. So I would just want to, encourage that.
I also wanted to say one thing real quick. I know I took up a lot of time. I apologize for that. I just think this is a great opportunity for us to be teams with our parents and our students and our teachers and administrators. So I'm excited to see where we can take it so that we can all be teams together. In that note, if we can, just something that helped me as a teacher during COVID is to communicate to parents what those essential learnings are at the beginning of the year, so that everybody's on the same page as a team. These are the essential learnings. Parents want to take that on, and the students want to take that on together, even older siblings with their kids, we can. And this is the last thing I'm going to say. I know this group of talented people can do hard things. We've done hard things, and we're going to do more hard things, and I appreciate that.
All right. Director Simons, any follow-up comments?
No, that's all.
Okay. Again, thank you. Thank you all for putting in the tremendous effort and the continued tremendous effort that's going to be required, not only for the rest of the summer, but the remainder of the school year. So thank you very much. Corey, did you have any follow-up comments on that? Or?
Board members, you covered it well, so I don't. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next agenda item is the consent agenda. Consent agenda items presented for approval can be viewed on the district website. And board members, are there any items that you would like to remove for separate consideration from the consent agenda? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as printed?
This is Director Simon, so moved.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Director Dawson-Walton. Any discussion? Hearing none, Sherry, can you please take a roll call vote?
Director Dawson-Walton.
Aye.
Director Mosqueda-Jones.
Aye.
Director Ostafi.
Aye.
Director Simons.
Aye.
4 ayes and 0 nays. The motion passes.
All right, thank you very much. Item number 10 are beginning of our action items for this evening. Our first action item is the ISD 279 10-year long-term facility maintenance plan. Ron Meyer to present. Mr. Meyer.
Well, thank you, Chair Ostafi, Superintendent McIntyre, and school board members. As stated in the board materials, the administration recommends approval of the 10-year long-term facility maintenance, or LTFM plan. At the June 23rd school board meeting, we discussed the 3 elements that the Department of Education requires each school district to submit by July 31st of each year, including the 10-year LTFM revenue projection, the 10-year LTFM expenditure worksheet, and the LTFM statement of assurance signed by the superintendent. As a reminder, LTFM funding is provided exclusively for deferred maintenance and health and safety related items and may not be used for other projects. As in previous years, our LTFM projects have been reprioritized based on the greatest needs in the district, as well as considering other work that is happening in the district, in particular the facility needs that have been identified through our Building a Better Future process. school board approval tonight will ensure that the LTFM revenue is included in our Pay 2021 preliminary levy that will come to the board in September. The next steps in our process will be to submit these items to the Department of Education by July 31st, and then we will be back before you in November to review the current LTFM projects in the summer of 2020, and also to present major projects scheduled for the summer of 2021. With that, I will turn it back to you, Chair Ostafi.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Is there a motion to approve the 10-year long-term facility maintenance plan? Board
So
members.
moved, Director Jackie Mosqueda Jones.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second, Director Simons.
Is there any discussion? Ron, you had mentioned earlier, or someone had mentioned earlier, that LTFM funds could be accessed along with CARES funds by teachers or schools that may have needed them. That was part of the discussion, and you just stated here that some of those LTM funds could be used for health and safety. We have a budget, we have a plan. How much of that has been planned for, or can you tell me how much we could potentially take out of that for COVID-related quick hits or concerns that come up without really hurting the budget or hurting the plan that we have?
Thank you, Chair Ostafi. That's a great question. We have had some initial conversations with Rachel Kohler, who manages our health safety LTFM budget, and Dale Carlstrom. In particular, the item that we could use as it relates to our COVID plan is for PPE, and we already can use those funds and have traditionally used those funds for purchasing certain PPE products for the district. And so as we look at our plan and our FY, in particular FY22 budget, because that's what the current 10-year plan will go towards the levy for that. We are looking at some of the earmarked dollars that are in that PPE line item, and we will be able to utilize that to increase our PPE if that is the best funding source that we identify, if CARES funding is not going to be enough in order to cover all of the other needs that we have across the district as it relates to our plan. So we do have some that are earmarked there in that PPE. We may have to reprioritize some of the other elements in health safety in order to be able to purchase the needed PPE, but we do have some flexibility within that plan in order to do that.
Okay, thank you, Ron. Any other questions or discussion from the board members? Hearing none, we'll take a roll call vote to approve the action item for the 10-year facility maintenance plan. Sherry?
Director Ostafi?
Aye.
Director Simons?
Aye.
Director Mosqueda Jones?
Aye.
Director Dawson Walton?
Aye.
You have 4 ayes and no nays. 4-0 passes.
Thank you very much. The next action item is related, and it's the approval of the resolution of intent to issue facility maintenance bonds. Mr. Meyer.
Thank you again, Chair Ostafi, Superintendent McIntyre, and board members. This agenda item is a resolution to officially state the school district's intent to proceed with the issuance and sale of general obligation facilities maintenance and refunding bonds. This resolution has 3 parts to it. The first is for the sale of $37,270,000 in general obligation facilities maintenance bonds as part of our 10-year long-term facility maintenance program that the board just approved. These funds will be utilized for summer projects in 2021 and 2022 and were included in the debt schedule that is in the board packet. The second part to this resolution is for the refunding of our Series 2011A alternative facilities bonds in the amount of $8,685,000. The refunding of this bond will produce an estimated savings to taxpayers of approximately $400,000. And the last part of the resolution is for the refunding of our Series 2013A alternative facilities bonds in the amount of $6,525,000, which will generate an estimated savings to taxpayers of approximately $100,000. To walk the board through each part of the resolution before you this evening and to answer any questions that you might have, I would like to welcome Jody Zespa, a Senior Municipal Advisor and Vice President with Ellers, who is the school district's municipal advisor. Jody?
Thank you, Ron. So you'll see the resolution before you. This is similar to the resolutions that you have approved in the past when you've issued facilities maintenance bonds, although we do have the opportunity to save some money for your taxpayers with the refunding bond issues too. So you'll see the authorization that Ron referred to in section 1 detailing the components of the bond issue. The reason that we're combining this bond issue is to save on costs of issuance and due to the fact that the timing of both of these transactions coincided so well this year. The refunding bonds that we're proceeding with have call dates of February 1st of 2021. You're able to close on the refunding of those bonds within 90 days of that call date. And that time period just happened to fall in place with the timing of your issuance of your new facilities maintenance bond issue also. We also, by moving forward with this resolution tonight, many times or in previous bond issues, we have waited until we were closer to the sale of the bonds to have you approve the authorization. However, this allows us to be able to move forward with MDE. They are reviewing your plan right now anyway that you just submitted to, that you just approved tonight. They need to review that for your upcoming levy. And they also need to provide approval to issue the bonds. So we're streamlining the process by taking care of both of those actions tonight. That way MDE only has to move it through their process one time. So you'll see that in section 2 of the resolution, it refers to the process from the Commissioner of Education to approve your 10-year plan and the issuance of bonds. As in the past, you'll have a notice that gets published in the newspaper, and then we'll start to proceed with the sale. So we do plan to provide you with a pre-sale report with more details related to this bond issue at your September board meeting, and then plan to sell the bonds on the day of your October 20th board meeting, and then close on the bonds November 12th. So that is when you will have the proceeds for your projects. And that is when we'll lock into those lower rates on your refunding bond issues. You'll notice that within the resolution, there's also a reference to the State Credit Enhancement Program. That's a program that's free of charge to participate in, and you get a guarantee from the state to make the payments on these bonds should you not be able to make the payments. And then I think there's a couple of other attachments that I'll refer to that were included in your board materials. So there's a letter dated July 13th, and that is a semi-annual letter that we provide to the district that looks at all of your outstanding debt and lets you know if there are any refunding opportunities. So you'll see that on the second page of that report, that is the start of your existing debt issues, and the 2 bond issues that we're talking about refunding are included at the top of that chart. And then we have an initial plan that we put together for your facilities maintenance bond issues, and you've seen this from us before. The first page has lots of different numbers on, but just kind of shows our schedule for issuing facilities maintenance bonds over time to maintain your facilities. And then most importantly, in the far right-hand column shows the tax rate related to your debt and capital levies. And then the page after that, page 233 of your packet, shows what we're expecting the debt schedule to look like for the new facilities maintenance bond issue. And then the chart on page 234 shows that nice level tax rate over time with a drop down built in a little bit later in the schedule to provide you some flexibility for financing future projects. And then finally, on page 235, that is the LTFM financing plan, showing this plan is the projects are financed with a combination of bonds and pay-as-you-go levies through your general fund for projects. You also do get some state aid as part of this program, which is nice also. And you can see that on that detailed plan on page 232, there's a column titled Estimated LTFM Aid. So nice to see the state kicking in some money in this program for these projects. So that is what we plan to cover tonight. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Otherwise, we'll be back with some updated estimates and more detailed information related to the bond sale at your meeting in September.
All right, thank you, Jody. Ron, did you have anything else to add?
I don't. I just wanted to thank Jody for sticking around overtime this evening and putting the extra time to be here to answer any questions that the board may have.
All right, thank you. With that, is there a motion to approve the resolution of intent to issue facility maintenance bonds? Board members?
So moved, Director Simons.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second, Jackie Mosqueda Jones.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? I want to thank you for finding $500,000 in savings.
Yeah, we're excited about that. It's always fun to lock into lower interest rates, and interest rates are at historic lows right now. We've been getting lots of bidders on the municipal bonds as we bring the sales to market. So we're hoping that remains the case, and will deliver some savings to your taxpayers going forward, which will be great. Not that you can't save it for other areas of your budget, but you do need to pass it on as savings to your taxpayers when you refund bonds and have savings.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments, board members? Sherry, can you please take a roll call vote?
Director Mosqueda Jones.
Aye.
Director Dawson Walton.
Aye.
Director Simons.
Aye.
Director Ostafi.
Aye.
4 ayes and 0 nays. The motion passes.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you. The next action item is gifts to the district, and is the approval of gifts to the district totaling $56,961.17. Is there a motion to approve those gifts to the district?
So moved, Jackie Mosqueda Jones.
Thank you. And is there a second?
Second, Director Simons.
Is there any discussion? Besides the always big thank you and the big
Yes.
smile. Thank you. With that, Sherry, can you please take a roll call vote?
Director Simons.
Aye.
Director Ostafi.
Aye.
Director Dawson Walton.
Aye.
Director Mosqueda Jones.
Aye.
4 ayes, 0 nays. Motion passes.
Thank you very much. Our next action item is 10D, I think, resolution on George Perry Floyd and systemic racism. And Directors Dawson Walton and Jackie Mosqueda Jones, you have the floor.
Thank you. I just, there's a lot that's happened, over the last couple of months, several months in our community, from COVID to the murder of George Floyd to civil unrest, to our own community, passion around a lot of different subjects and topics that are really more heart topics, but that but there's no doubt they impact our education system. And on top of that, what happened most recently is that 2 civil rights legends passed away, Reverend T. Vivian and John Lewis. And as I really reflected on their passing and their legacies and their courage to get to this point in our district, that we're able to put forward a resolution that truly embodies, I believe, our mission and our vision and our focus and our strategic plan and priorities and parent voices and student voices and teachers' voices and staff voices of all different levels. And I think we have an opportunity. I know we have an opportunity as an Osseo School District to be leaders, to address racial disparities head on in our district, because that's the only way we're going to come together and move forward with solutions for our society. And so I am hopeful that we'll be able to move forward and make a commitment about acknowledging the murder of George Floyd and seeking justice, as well as looking at our system, our institutional system, and looking at the disparities that have deepened along the lines of race, which is always, it's kind of like the, every time we have a meeting, I keep say that, or a work session, I feel like it always boils down to one kind of common denominator. And so, and then of course, just lifting up our student voice, you know, our Black students in particular. And I think by that, everyone is really uplifted, and we are stronger together. And you know, when I think about, there's this quote, I'm gonna see if I can pull it up real quick, by John, from John Lewis, and he said, sorry, I'm pulling it up right now. It's coming. You know, it was very moving, and you know, it was amazing that everything that he had been through, from Selma to being a freedom fighter, to coming to Congress, you know, he also witnessed what happened with George Floyd, and witnessed an unrest that he likened to Selma. So it was very moving to see hundreds and thousands of people from all over America and around the world to take the streets to speak up, to speak out, to get into what I call good trouble, but to get in the way. And because of the action of young and old, Black, white, Latino, Asian American, Native American, because people cried and prayed, people will never ever forget what happened and how it happened. And it is my hope that we are on our way to greater change. And I believe that as a district, we can get there together. And so I would ask my colleagues to support this resolution.
Thank you, Director Dawson-Walton. Director Mosqueda-Jones.
I've been thinking about this for a long time, about what I wanted to say tonight, and I wrote out something that I wanted to read, but I'm not going to read that right now. I'm going to go a little different route. I know that as a board, we agree that we want safe and supportive schools. We want every single student to feel welcome and safe. We want every single student to have challenging opportunities to reach their full potential academically. And I know that every single person on this board supports those two things, and also recognizes that we have a huge opportunity gap that some of us call the achievement gap, and we've made very little progress with what we've been doing. There's a story that Peter Reynolds tells in one of his books with Ibram Kendi, and it goes like this. Someone notices a baby floating in the river, and then another, and another, and the person calls for help. So other people come and they jump in, and more babies flow downstream, and people keep coming and they help grab the babies out of the stream, except for one person. This person runs to the beginning of this river to figure out how the babies are getting into the river in the first place and what might be done about it. What we're asking here tonight is to stop doing equity work where we are working on the symptoms instead of the problem. So instead of seeing problems and doing things to fix it when they're happening, let's figure out where they're stemming from, look at the systems, look at what those barriers are. We're now going into a new area of learning where we might be jumping back and forth between hybrid and in-person and online. And it's a perfect opportunity for us to identify those policies, those procedures, those practices, and those relationships that are that have been affected by this pandemic that we've all been part of a system that has, we are all a piece of this system, and we can all work together as parents and students and administrators to truly address the racial disparities and the systemic barriers that have plagued our educational system since its inception. And so I'm asking that we all agree to do what's best for our students, to do what's best for our Black students, our Indigenous students, our students of color, and our white students. Because when we identify those barriers, we bring down those barriers for every single one of our students. And being anti-racist instead of just non-racist, or instead of trying to make our system fit everyone else, is really truly the only way to help our kids do what we really want them to do, and to fulfill our pledge that we said at the beginning of this meeting for liberty and justice for every single child.
Thank you, Director Mosqueda-Jones. Director Simons.
Are we in the discussion phase? I think you were just having.
Yeah, you're right. That was the presentation. We have it. It's been in front of us. So I guess now, is there a motion to approve the resolution on George Perry Floyd and systemic racism?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? With that, I guess I can put that up to Director Simons.
Yeah, so I'm just going to speak very plainly. This is really challenging work. And when you're in a public environment, you don't get to speak as human beings to one another. And we didn't really have the opportunity to come together and work on this like we normally would due to the environment. And so that's a challenge, and we all want to have our individual voices reflected in this type of work. And I think we'll continue to have that opportunity. This is one place to start, and I think it's not the end point. It's this a starting point. And throughout the past year and a half that I've been on the board, I've heard all board members challenge the work that we're doing so far, and ask for opportunities to see different results, to really dig into the root cause. And I agree, when we think about the symptoms, we see school districts across the state struggling with these outcomes, and nobody has that magic solution, but that doesn't mean that we don't keep working at it. And um, we have been leaders in the work, so I do want to acknowledge the degree of work and effort, resources, and investment that's gone into this. And I think the dialogue on this resolution has been a little bit lost in the public sector in terms of the work that we're doing and the work that we all are bringing to the table. And that's okay, because that's, like I said, I'm going to speak plainly, like, this is just a really difficult environment. And we haven't really had that chance to come together as a community at this point. And I appreciate the comments by our board members, Jackie and Kelsey, that this is something that we've all been committed to over the course of time. Um, so I think right now, I've expressed a lot of my point of view in the past, and that I really feel very passionate about focusing on our jurisdiction, and doing the right thing in the right way. When I look at our action items, it's a set of recommendations that we prioritize, and we will still need to fully form those recommendations, and they'll still need to be brought through the mechanisms of approval. whether that's allocating budget resources or fully fleshing out how this will be implemented and then approving that implementation. So I just want to be clear on that there's still another set of work to do to continue to advance all of the ideas, these ideas and other ideas. So when I think about advancing work forward, I think about having a starting place. And even if I'm 80%, 90% there, I think it's important that we have a starting place to continue the work forward and that we continue to make this a focus of our work session so that all of our voices can be reflected in our own ways and in our own commitments to the work ahead. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Director Simons.
Chair Ostafi, can I offer some comments either after your comments or before, wherever you prefer, before the vote, please?
Yes, after my comments, and then I'll give you the floor. It's very difficult. I mean, I was shocked and disgusted by the actions of Minneapolis police officers and the homicide of Mr. Floyd. We all were. That spark, fanned by other actions and inactions, turned into the flames that rocked this region, the state, and the country. However, thankfully, it has led to a needed and deeper conversation regarding the issue of race and justice in our society. I fully support creating a learning environment for students